Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description. The Devil Wears White. The ASL trio have been kidnapped, taken to a place that people only see in their nightmares. Children are tested on and lives are thrown away carelessly. How will they escape? If they do, who can they trust? And what's with these strange new powers? Now this is the season 1 of this fanfiction. It will have a season 2 where the same Luffy starts his adventure as from East Blue like in canon, but stronger and experienced. I don't own anything, adios.
Waking up the next day, the brothers found themselves heading straight to where they knew Marco was. They had gotten up a bit later than they normally would, more tired than usual due to staying up late last night, arguing over whether they should stay or go. Ace was, of course, adamant over leaving. Sabou was not as adamant about staying, but thought it was more beneficial to stay rather than leave. Luffy didn't mention his opinion once throughout the whole argument. He had sat silently and watched as his brothers fought back and forth over which was the safer option for them. It wasn't that he didn't have an opinion, because he did, but he didn't want to force his brothers to stay or leave because it was what he wanted. To be honest, he didn't really mind one way or the other. He adored Shanks, obviously, but he was also starting to grow attached to the Whitebeard pirates as well. With Teach thrown into the equation, though, it made things a bit more complicated. If they left, Luffy would be comforted by the thought that they had warned Marco and Whitebeard about the man, told them about the darkness. He knew the two of them believed him, and he had noticed that they were actually watching the man closer than anyone else on the crew. All in all, Luffy would be just fine staying or going. As long as he was with his brothers, he would be happy. He would fight as many Marines as he had to, eat as little as needed, sleep on the uncomfortable floor, stay awake all night, anything. As long as it meant he and his brothers stayed together, he would be happy. So Ace and Sabou argued. There was no anger in the argument, frustration sure, but nothing that would cause an actual fight. Ace knew why Sabou wanted to stay and Sabou knew why Ace wanted to leave. There was a good reason for both options, but which one was the best was a much harder decision to come to. Hence why they were tired after nearly pulling an all-nighter. Marco was where they knew he would be. Right next to Whitebeard. There was a bit of a routine to the Whitebeard pirates. One the brothers easily picked up on over the course of the 3 weeks they had been on the ship. Yes, it had been 3 weeks already, time flies. Almost every morning, Marco would be right beside Whitebeard. Whether it was to give out chores, report something to the captain, or just stand idly by, the first mate would always be there. After a couple hours he would leave and head off elsewhere, but that wasn't the point. The point was, they knew exactly where the man they needed to talk was. So they went there. Marco, Whitebeard, good morning. Sabou greeted, the three of them standing in front of both Whitebeard and Marco. It wasn't that strange for the crew to see the brothers there now. After all, they had spent nearly the entire day yesterday glued to the spot in front of Whitebeard's chair. Good morning. Whitebeard and Marco greeted back. Instead of the brothers sitting like most expected, they continued standing, Sabou turning to give Marco his attention. I was wondering, could we give Shanks another call? I'm sorry to ask about this again, but we had a bit of a revelation if you will on something he mentioned last time and thought we should tell him about it. Sabou explained with a smile. Marco looked to Whitebeard who nodded. No problem, Yoi. I'll take you there. Marco said, already beginning to walk away. The brothers followed, Sabou thanking Whitebeard as they passed him. He was, for the most part, silent as they walked, and once they entered the hallway leading to the room they needed it went silent. There was no more chatter from surrounding pirates filling up the space. What have you and Red Hair been talking about? You don't have to tell me if you don't want, Yoi. Marco said, more to make conversation than anything, but he would be lying if he said he wasn't curious. Sabou's smile never wavered though. He expected this to be a question that the first mate would ask. After all, they had been having quite a few conversations with the captain now in a short period of time. Nothing much, but Shanks had an idea that he wanted us to give some input on, Sabou explained easily without giving too much detail to the made-up story. Marco nodded, accepting the answer as they reached the door. Marco said a quick goodbye and headed off, leaving the brothers alone as they entered the room. Before we call, are we all 100% sure this is what we want to do? Now's the time to change our minds. Sabou said, and even though he was saying it, he knew no one would speak up. This had been a long, thought-out decision. There wasn't any more to argue on the matter. When no one said anything, Sabou nodded, picking up the snail phone and dialing Shanks' number. Waiting for the captain to answer was a bit nerve-wracking because once he did and they told him their decision, that would be it. Sure, they could change their mind, but it would be more hassle than it would be worth. Red-haired Shanks here. Who's this? Shanks answered, someone yelling at him in the background. Sabou smiled a bit despite his nerves and pulled the speaker a bit closer to his mouth. Shanks, it's us, Sabou replied, not needing to say anything more as understanding shone on the snail's face. Ah, my 3 favorite brothers. So, I assume you're calling to give me your decision? Shanks said. Sabou swallowed, glancing at his brothers for confirmation that this is what they were doing. A nod from Ace reassured him in their decision and he nodded. We are. Maybe we should just ask for more information, Yoi. After all, they are the ones who spoke to us about it first. Marco said in a hushed tone as he and his father watched over the crew, spending most of their time watching Teach than anyone else. If we do that we could scare them off, my son. We need to be patient. Obviously, they know something we don't. Whatever this darkness is that Luffy mentioned, it's nothing good, and not only will we be watching out, but the brothers will as well. They'll know what to look for and I'm confident that they'll warn us again if anything is going to happen soon. Whitebeard said calmly. Marco frowned, staying silent for a second. Do you think one of them has an ability? A devil fruit maybe that lets them see the future or something, Yoi? Marco asked. Whitebeard frowned and thought. I don't know, son. The youngest fell in the water a little while ago though, correct? Whitebeard asked. Marco nodded, thinking back to when Luffy had fallen overboard. Yeah, but he treaded water for a bit before Namur got him, Yoi. Ace and Sabou didn't jump in after him though, so there's a chance that one of them has it, Marco said. It is a possibility. For now though, it's only speculation. Who knows, maybe they just have strong intuition. All we can do right now is watch and hope for the best. When the three of them are more comfortable I'm sure they'll give out more information on the topic, Whitebeard said. By the way, did the navigator say when we'll be reaching Sabou? Whitebeard asked, glancing up into the sky. They had hit a bit of a dry patch in terms of wind and it had slowed their progress to the archipelago. They're estimating another day or two of travel. They think the winds should be picking up, but even in paradise the weather can be unpredictable, especially this close to the new world. Marco said, crossing his arms as he looked into the sky as well. Whitebeard laughed heartily. You don't have to tell me about that, son. I've traveled these seas for far too long for that to be new information. Whitebeard laughed. Marco grinned at his captain's joy and nodded. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the three mysterious brothers themselves coming back out onto the deck from where they had been talking to Shanks. They were tapping again, or Sabou was at least. The other two were beside him, and Marco noticed that once Sabou stopped tapping, Ace started. I see what you meant before, Marco, Whitebeard said softly. Not to hide the fact that he was talking about the brother was thinking as he spoke. The first mate peeked at his father before nodding. Both of them wore frowns as they thought about what the tapping could be about, but no matter how many times Marco revisited the subject, he didn't get any closer to figuring out what it was. It didn't matter because the brothers crossed the deck in a timely manner, disappearing once again into the depths of the Moby. They had headed into the hallways that would lead them to the commander's rooms, as well as the room that they were currently residing in, so Marco assumed they would be there until breakfast was ready. Those boys sure are a mystery, Whitebeard said with a smile. What now? Ace muttered. They were walking through the empty hall towards their room, having just finished their conversation with Shanks. Well, we continue like we planned before all of this happened. Sabou sighed out quietly as they walked right past their room and continued down the hall. After much debate about how many Marines they could take down, how long they could stay awake until they became non-functional, how long they could go without food before losing their strength, they had come to the agreement that they were more likely safe on the Whitebeard's ship rather than Shanks. We had already planned on staying indefinitely, so why should we change anything now? We just have to take into account the fact that there's someone with darkness here, that's all. Sabou said in a hushed voice, keeping an ear out for anyone who could possibly be eavesdropping on them. We still get to eat lots of food, right? Luffy questioned, remembering how he had finally been able to eat his fill for once. Sabou nodded. Don't worry, Lou, you can still eat lots. Actually, I think now's a good time for the next test. Sabou said after a second of thought. Ace and Luffy gave each other a look of confusion before turning to look at Sabou, who still looked to be thinking as he glanced around the halls. What do you mean? Ace asked, and he was responded to with their silent language, tipping them off that there was either someone getting too close or this was something Sabou didn't want to chance anyone hearing. The pirates didn't react like we thought they would to the fact that you two eat a lot, right? Sabou asked, the brothers nodding. Yeah, they didn't get all mad and kick us out, Luffy confirmed, smiling a little. He liked the pirates, except for Teach of course, and the fact that they still seemed to accept the brothers, even after knowing how much they could eat, made Luffy like them even more. He sure hoped they weren't acting like Ace and Sabou worried they were. Right, so either they've got lots of patience, or they really aren't acting. So, why not step it up? Give them a perfect opportunity to get rid of one of us and see what they do. Sabou asked. Ace frowned at the thought, wondering where Sabou was going with this while Luffy looked even more confused. Get rid of us? Luffy asked. Sabou nodded, looking around again before turning down what the trio found to be a dead-end hall. That's right. We can give them a chance to easily get rid of one of us and see what they do, Sabou said, keeping an ear out for anyone coming. What do you have in mind? Ace asked skeptically. He trusted that his blonde brother wouldn't put any one of them in actual harm's way, but that didn't mean Ace would like whatever this plan of his was. I think if one of us gets lost, Sabou began, already raising alarms in the eldest's head. "And have someone find them, then we can see what they would do. The other two would be nearby in case they did try something," Sabou explained. Ace frowned at the thought. "But didn't we already kind of do that?" Ace questioned, remembering the time Luffy had gotten lost, for real. "Yes, but Marco and Thatch found him. We already knew from the start that they were relatively good people. They helped Luffy and kept their promises after all, but I'm talking about a stranger. There are plenty of people on the Moby we haven't met yet, so why not have it be one of them?" Sabou asked. He could tell Ace didn't like the plan, and Luffy didn't seem all that thrilled either, but this was something they needed to do. They couldn't just keep hanging around these pirates forever walking on eggshells. They needed to know their intentions before they were able to finally get comfortable around any of them. "Who's getting lost?" Ace asked, even though it looked like he already knew the answer. Sabou looked a bit hesitant now, rubbing the back of his head. "To be honest, I was thinking Luffy," Sabou admitted, Ace's frown deepening at the thought. Nope. Not happening," Ace denied out loud, shaking his head at the thought. Sabou sighed, already expecting this reaction. "Ace, come on, it makes the most sense. Think about it, I can't go because we'll need my hearing in case something goes wrong. And even though we told people we don't have fighting experience, you still look like you won't go down without a fight. It would deter anyone from actually doing anything. If we send Luffy, they'll think he's defenseless and will more than likely do something around him," Sabou explained. Everyone went silent now. No talking, no tapping, no noise, nothing. Ace sat, thinking over everything Sabou had just said. "You and I won't be far away. If the pirate does turn, then all Luffy has to do is ask for help. I'll hear him and we can run in and save the day," Sabou explained, and Ace had to admit that it was the best plan. "Fine. Where are we doing this?" Luffy wandered the halls silently, looking around in wonder as he did. They hadn't really explored this section of the Moby that much, and now that he had the chance he was taking in everything he could. It wasn't much different from all the other halls, but this one had its own sense that Luffy had only briefly smelled before. Footsteps ahead of him clued him into the reason he was in this hall in the first place. Ace and Sabou were trailing pretty far back, not even visible if Luffy turned around. They had moved to this hallway because according to Sabou this hall was more frequented than the others. This held true because ahead of him, Luffy could see a pirate walking his way. A quick stalk of the man's emotions told Luffy that he was safe for now. There was nothing bad or malicious, just calm and neutrality. Once the man was close enough that he noticed Luffy, he noticed confusion worming its way into the man's emotions, and even a little bit of worry. "Luffy, right?" the man asked a bit hesitantly, looking around the empty hall. Luffy nodded, tilting his head a bit as he observed the man. He wasn't doing anything to harm him yet. So far so good. "Where are, your brothers?" the man asked, and Luffy could feel a bit of fear beginning to take hold in the man now. That was weird. "I dunno," Luffy said in a small voice. He was always told he was a bad liar, and it was true, but Sabou had been teaching him how to lie better so it wouldn't be so easy for people to figure it out. He had told him to keep some truth in his lies, and Luffy did. He didn't really know where his brothers were, he just knew they were behind him somewhere. "So, you're lost?" the man asked. Luffy nodded, opting to not speaking on that one as he looked around as if he had no clue where he was, but really he didn't want the man to see how much he was sweating from the tiny lie. "Oh, well, why don't I take you back to the deck? We can look for them there, or find Marco or Pops," the man said, seemingly a bit unsure. Luffy nodded again, feeling happy that the man hadn't turned on him like Ace thought he would. Luffy knew that most people on board were good people, but he didn't know whether they were just good actors or actually meant well. "Well, it's this way. Oh, my name's Kaseki by the way," Kaseki said, realizing he hadn't introduced himself. Luffy nodded once more and Kaseki turned, leading him out of the hall and back toward the deck. Luffy smiled as they walked. Feed Sabou had been feeling dim a bit. "I like you, Kaseki," Luffy said as they reached the door. Kaseki looked a bit shocked at the boy's words, but his shock quickly turned into a smile. "Thanks, Luffy, I like you too," he said as they walked out onto the deck. Luffy shivered a bit when he noticed Teach was right by the door they had just exited and felt his stomach drop, throat tightening. How had he not realized that the darkness was so close by? Teach seemed to notice that Luffy was by himself at that same moment, and Luffy grimaced when he felt the darkness get stronger. Before Teach had a chance to say anything, Luffy bolted over to where he knew safety was, smiling brightly in relief. "Marco!" Luffy cheered happily, using the relief he felt from being away from Teach to sound happy as he charged toward the man. Marco turned with a look of confusion and shock on his face, and Luffy had to stop himself from ramming into the man, remembering what he was supposed to be doing in the first place. "Luffy, Yui, where are your brothers?" Marco asked, looking around the deck for them. Even though the crew had seen Luffy alone a few times, it was never without good reason. "I got lost again, and Kaseki found me and helped me get out of those long hallways, and then I saw you," Luffy said cheerfully, the lie rolling off his tongue easily with how relieved he felt at being near warmth rather than darkness. Understanding shone on Marco's face and he sighed, smiling a little. "Why don't we go find them then? I'm sure they're worried about you," Marco said as he glanced around, and Luffy realized something. He could feel Marco using his haki. He would definitely have to tell Ace and Sabou about that later. "Come on, Yoi, I think they're this way," Marco said as he began leading the way. Luffy nodded, sidling close to the first mate when he realized they would have to pass Teach again. If Marco noticed that Luffy was practically clinging to his side, he didn't say anything about it. Luffy nearly sighed in relief when the door to the deck closed behind them and they were alone again in the hall. "So, what were you three doing? Were you looking for a specific room?" Marco asked curiously. Luffy shook his head, smiling. "We were exploring," he exclaimed happily as he followed his brother's waves back to where they were. Marco nodded, and Luffy forgot that the man was supposed to be leading them, not the other way around. Slowing down a bit so that Marco would be leading again, Luffy looked around, discreetly smelling the air around them. "Nay, Marco, is breakfast ready yet?" Luffy asked, mouth drooling at the delicious smells wafting their way. Marco glanced at the boy, a small smile on his face as he nodded. "Should be soon, Yoi," he said as they turned a corner. "That's good. I'm hungry," Luffy said matter-of-factly. They were only walking for another minute or so, turning a few corners when they heard Ace and Sabou. "I'm telling you, he went this way. Are you sure? He doesn't even know what's over here. Wouldn't he go back towards the rooms?" "This is Luffy we're talking about. He goes towards what he doesn't know." "True, but, Ace, Sabou," Luffy cheered happily, jumping away from Marco's side and running into his brother's arms. "Luffy, see, told you," Ace said, sticking his tongue out to Sabou, who retaliated with his own. "You alright, Luffy?" Sabou asked, checking over Luffy quickly. Luffy nodded, still grinning. Kaseki found me and took me to the deck and I found Marco and then Marco found you guys," Luffy said, telling an entire story within a sentence. Sabou laughed, Ace smiling, and the two turned to Marco. "Thank you once again for helping our brother. He gets lost easy," Sabou said as Luffy slid in between Ace and Sabou, taking their hands. "I see that. It was no problem, really, Yoi. See you three at breakfast," Marco says, waving it off as he turns to head back to the deck. "See you there," Sabou responds, the three watching Marco. When he was out of sight, the two eldest sighed in relief. "I didn't think Teach would be right there. Sorry, Lou." Sabou apologized, remembering how he had heard Teach head right to the door Luffy exited with Kaseki. The man had been across the deck when this whole thing started, but once Luffy was headed to the deck, Teach headed to the door. It didn't sit well with Sabou. "It's okay, 'cause I saw Marco and I went to him before Teach could do anything," Luffy said, even though he was still a bit shaken up at the memory of how close he had been to Teach. In any case, the test was a success. Kaseki sounded a bit off, but he didn't try anything. "He brought you to Marco," Sabou said, remembering all of Kaseki's stuttering. He was scared for some reason when he saw you weren't with me. He was worried too and confused, but he was nice," Luffy said. Sabou and Ace raised an eyebrow at that. "That's weird. Anyway, breakfast is ready, let's head to the galley." "What's the next test?" Ace asked from his spot beside Luffy. They were once again in front of Whitebeard, the captain talking to some nurses about IVs and alcohol. Most of it went over Ace and Luffy's heads, so they had instead started talking to each other while Sabou listened, finding out that the captain was actually quite sick. "Dunno. Sabou's good at making those," Luffy answered as he tried to figure out what the nurses were trying to put into the captain's arm. He liked Whitebeard, and he didn't like nurses. He had found himself watching all of the nurses' movements, making sure the nurses didn't try to hurt the giant on purpose, or try and do tests on him. "Sabou?" Ace asked, noticing that the blonde was also watching the nurses' every movement. Apparently old habits die hard. Even though none of the brothers were being worked on by the nurses, they couldn't help but watch their movements for any sign of wrongdoing. Whitebeard was someone they all liked enough to stay by, and if nurses started messing with him, they wouldn't be happy. "Fine. We'll watch more nurses," Ace said, but even he had been watching their movements already. The three went silent as they watched, a few commanders coming by every now and then to talk to Whitebeard, but none of them staying. Right now, Thatch, Marco, and Foso were there, discussing Kami Nuwa with the captain. "Does that hurt?" Luffy suddenly asked. He didn't feel any pain coming from the captain, but weren't the nurses poking needles into him? Luffy thought that the liquids in those needles would make him hurt, or make him sleepy, like the liquids the doctors at the facility give him. Whitebeard smiled, shaking his head. "No, they don't hurt," Whitebeard assured, allowing the nurses to continue injecting things into him. "But when we got shots they would hurt, or make us sleepy," Luffy said, tilting his head in confusion. "These are good shots, Luffy, they help people get better. We got bad shots, they weren't supposed to help us get better," Sabou explained as best he could without giving too much away to those listening. Luffy frowned, seeming to think about something. "So, they're the good shots? Like the ones they gave me and you when we got really sick?" Luffy asked, remembering the time that Sabou and he had died, but the doctors had given them both a bunch of shots that helped them. Exactly, they helped us get better. That's what those shots are doing. They're helping Whitebeard, Sabou said. Luffy seemed to understand. Oh, okay. Does that mean you're sick, Mr. Whitebeard? Luffy asked, wondering if that was the case. Or was he dying? When Sabou and Luffy got the shots, it was because they were dying and they needed help. Panic started to rise in him at this revelation and his eyes widened, breathing picking up. Whitebeard couldn't die. He really liked the giant old man. He was a good person and had lots of warmth and kept him and his brothers safe. Noticing the sudden panic, Ace and Sabou both grabbed Luffy's hands, trying to calm him down. They weren't quite sure what had brought the sudden attack on, but they knew it probably wasn't. The pirates around them had noticed Luffy's panic and stopped to watch while the commanders and Whitebeard watched with a mixture of worry and confusion. You're not gonna die, right? You're not getting shots because you're dying, are you? Luffy asked fearfully, only seconds away from jumping up and doing anything he could think of to keep the man in front of him from dying. Ace and Sabou suddenly understood where the panic was coming from. After all, Luffy didn't have many good experiences with shots. The only time anyone around him got good shots was when they were so sick they were dying, and in their cases, dead. Gararara, don't worry, Brad. I'm not dying anytime soon. Whitebeard laughed, all of the brothers letting out sighs of relief at the words. Luffy calmed down considerably and nodded. It was silent now as the nurses began working again, the commanders eventually continuing their conversation with Whitebeard. So, Sabou. Ace tapped eventually, once they had all calmed down a bit. What? Sabou asked, still watching the nurses along with his brothers. New plan? Ace asked, wondering what the next one would be. The pirates had to be acting, and the fact that they hadn't done anything yet was a bit unnerving. A soft sigh left Sabou as the nurses finished up, packing needles in bags and removing gloves. I don't know yet. Give me some time to think about one. Omake. I heard you ran into little Luffy earlier, Kaseki. A man said as he and Kaseki sat in a circle with a few other men, drinking. It was a nice night out, and they weren't on watch, so it was as good a time as ever to hang out, drink, and play cards. Oh, yeah, I did. Kaseki said, laughing a little. His friend raised an eyebrow at him. So, what was he like? Man, I've tried talking to him and his brothers since they got here, but every time I try they just walk off or completely ignore me. The man complained, his friends making noises of agreement. Kaseki shrugged. He was okay, I guess. He was lost, so I brought him to the deck and Commander Marco took care of him, Kaseki explained. The hero Kaseki, helping out kids whenever possible. Another man joked, patting Kaseki on the back. Everyone laughed at that as the dealer dealt out everyone's hand. So, did you talk to him? The first man asked. Kaseki, once again, laughed, this time sheepishly. Actually, I was too scared, Kaseki said a bit hesitantly, already knowing he was going to be endlessly made fun of for this. Scared? Of what? He's just a kid, the man across from us said, everyone laughing again. Yeah, but it wasn't him I was scared of, it's his brothers. You've seen those glares Ace gives. I wouldn't be surprised if he could pack a punch, and I do not want to be on the receiving end of it because I accidentally made Luffy sad or something, Kaseki defended, and suddenly everyone understood a bit more, nods going around as they remembered the glares Ace would give whenever someone looked their way. I see what you mean, but you were scared of a kid. Kaseki groaned. Sabou made a noise that was somewhere between a laugh and a snort. His brothers looked at him with confusion. What was that? Ace asked, wondering what noise had just come from Sabou. The blonde shook his head, walking over to their bed and laying down. Nothing, someone was just proving my point. It was at lunch the next day that Sabou finally thought up a new plan to get the pirates to turn on them. Even though the whole point of this was to find out whether the pirates were acting or not, the three brothers found themselves getting more and more desperate for the pirates to finally turn on them. It was unnerving for the pirates to keep smiling, to keep the niceties going, to be helpful and accommodating. Everyone the brothers had ever met always had other intentions when being nice to the brothers. No one was nice without reason, whether it was because they wanted to trick them, trap them, lure them into a false sense of security, or hurt them. They didn't count Makino or Emily. So, what's the new plan? Ace asked as they left the galley. Ace was itching to get the pirates to show their true colors. He didn't believe for one second that they were all actually this nice and helpful. They were pirates after all. The only thing I can think to do is to try and get them mad and see how they react, but there's not much we can do to get them mad without picking a fight with them, which is not what we want to do. Sabou started, Ace and Luffy nodding in agreement. Because of that, we had to do something that would be annoying and would give them an excuse to get mad if they wanted. Sabou continued. What's that? Ace asked, wanting to know. That's the easy part. The crew has chores, right? We've seen them cleaning the deck plenty of times, and they always have those buckets of water with them when they do. All we have to do is knock one over and see how they react. Sabou explained as they walked towards their room. Because the brothers were eating more during meal times, they were finishing later than they used to, but they also had more energy and it was easier for them to do more without getting tired. Despite this, Sabou still had them head to their room because, normally, they would sit with Whitebeard and listen to stories, but seeing as they had this plan it would look weird if they suddenly stood up and went and knocked over a bucket with seemingly no reason. It had to look like an accident. Once they reached the room they wasted a bit of time just hanging out. Luffy laid on the bed, in a weird in-between state of asleep but awake, and Ace was pacing, his nerves still bouncing over the fact that this could be the time that the pirates finally attack. Sabou shared Ace's nerves. Both of them still more than a bit confused as to why the pirates hadn't done anything to turn on them after all this time. They waited in there about an hour before Sabou heard cleaning supplies being taken out and buckets being filled with water. Another few minutes and everyone was in position, cleaning the deck while others milled around them. "Alright, it's time to go," Sabou announced, Ace going and getting Luffy up. The boy was a bit groggy and disoriented, but got up anyways, following Ace and Sabou to the door as they headed out. The walk was quick and within a few minutes, they were out on deck once again. Ace could see the people swabbing the deck, along with the buckets that littered the area around them. Ace and Sabou didn't even have a chance to pretend to stumble over there and knock one over because, well, frankly, Luffy did it for them. Apparently, the young teen was so groggy and disoriented that, while rubbing his eyes, he had drifted away from his brothers and managed to trip right over one of the buckets himself, both him and the bucket toppling to the floor. There were a few gasps as people noticed the boy fall and Ace and Sabou rushed over to their brother's side. They couldn't get there before he managed to fall face first into the water he knocked over, but they helped him up regardless, Ace using his shirt to wipe off the water falling down Luffy's face while Sabou turned to gauge the reactions of those around them. "We're sorry for this, I guess Luffy was more tired than we thought," Sabou said truthfully. Even though this had been their plan in the first place, it hadn't gone exactly how they thought it would. "Oh, it's no problem. Is he alright? That was some fall," the pirate who had been next to the bucket said, sending a worried look to Luffy. "He's fine. Come on Luffy, let's go change your clothes," Ace said, noticing that quite a bit of water had gotten on Luffy, enough to drain the boy if they didn't change soon. Luffy followed as Ace led them away while Sabou gave a polite smile, beginning to follow them as well. "Again, sorry about the mess," Sabou called as they walked off. It looked like most of the pirates were too shocked to even know what to do, making it the perfect time for the brothers to leave. "Well, can't say I expected that," Sabou muttered as the door shut behind them. He turned to look at Luffy, noticing his black hair was dripping and his clothes were thoroughly soaked from where he landed in the puddle. "Either way we did it. Now we just have to wait for those bastards to come running after us," Ace said, still entirely convinced that the pirates were acting and this would be the last straw. Sabou looked at Ace for a minute but said nothing, instead turning to face forward again. "The plan worked, right?" Luffy suddenly asked, looking much more awake than he had been previously. Sabou chuckled a little but nodded. "Yes Lu, it worked. You could have told us you were still too tired," Sabou said, remembering that Luffy had seemed groggy getting up, but not groggy enough to go stumbling over buckets. "I wasn't, but the cleaning stuff hurt my nose and gave me a headache and I got confused for a second," Luffy explained, scrunching his nose a few times at the memory. Ace and Sabou suddenly felt bad, not realizing that Luffy had been asleep enough that his senses would be overloaded once they walked out of their room. "It's fine, I didn't know either. I didn't think I fell asleep," Luffy said with a shrug, noticing the guilt that came rolling off of his brothers. This stopped Ace and Sabou from saying anything, but they still felt a bit guilty as they entered their shared room. Sabou went to the closet to get more clothes while Ace helped get Luffy out of his soaked clothes. "So, I guess that plan didn't work. What's next?" Ace asked. "Ace, we can't just throw one thing after another at them. Even if they aren't acting they can still get mad. Anyone would if we kept pushing," Sabou explained with a sigh as he pulled out a shirt and pants, turning around and helping Luffy into them. "Yeah, but I don't like it, they're just so nice," Sabou asked, seeing that Ace was having a hard time with the word. Ace shot him a glare, grumbling. "Pirates aren't nice. Pirates are supposed to be mean and greedy, not nice and helpful," Ace said, and Sabou had to agree with him on that one. It wasn't every day that you saw nice pirates. "To be fair, doctors are supposed to be nice and helpful, not mean and greedy," Sabou countered, making Ace laugh spitefully. "I think we live in opposite world then. Or we just have really shitty luck," Ace said as he walked to the bed and flopped onto it, face buried in the pillows. Sabou laughed while Luffy looked confused. "Opposite world?" he asked, not knowing what Ace meant by that. The blonde shook his head, ruffling Luffy's damp hair. "It's nothing Lu, Ace is just a bit confused," Sabou said before frowning and looking to the door. "Or he might just be right," he said as he walked up to the door, looking ready to open it. Now Ace and Luffy were both confused as they watched Sabou's back. "Huh? What do you mean?" Ace asked as he sat up and turned to look at Sabou. "Well, it would seem that Marco's on his way over here. Whether it's because he's mad or because he's worried about Luffy, who knows?" Sabou explained with a shrug as he listened to the footsteps get closer. Luffy moved to the door as well so he could get a better read on Marco's feelings. "Not mad. A little bit of worry, but it's not why he's coming. He's calm. Luffy said softly in case Marco was close enough to hear. So this is it then? They're turning? Ace asked, sitting up in a deady for a fight. We don't know that yet, Ace, calm down, Sabou hissed quietly, glaring at the hot-headed teen. Ace glared back but didn't drop his position. Shaking his head, Sabou turned back to the door, opening it right as a knock resounded in the room. Luffy backed away as the door opened, moving beside Ace while Sabou looked out. Hello, Commander, Sabou said politely, smiling to Marco as he did. Marco nodded his head in greeting, noticing that he couldn't see in the room like always when Sabou answered. Hello Sabou, is Luffy alright, Yoi? Marco asked, to which Sabou replied with a nod. He was just a little disoriented after his nap, the blonde responded easily. That's good. I came because Pops wanted to talk to you three, Marco said, getting to the point. Sabou's smile remained on his face, though it was a bit strained now. Oh, alright, we'll head right over, Sabou answered, Marco nodding. He'll be in the room with the snail phones when you're ready, Yoi, the first mate said as Sabou began closing the door. Thank you, Commander, Sabou said as he shut the door completely, turning to Ace and Luffy with a frown. So they're turning, Ace said in an I told you so manner. Sabou rolled his eyes, but he was also beginning to feel that way. If they are, we need to be ready. Luffy, you're awake now right? The smells won't be too much for you? Sabou asked, Luffy shaking his head. No, I'm fine now, the youngest responded, feeling a bit tense at the prospect that the pirates were turning on them. Good. If they're turning on us then don't fight Whitebeard. He's too strong for all of us put together. Focus on getting a snail phone and getting out of there. We should be able to run to one of the lifeboats we saw and can call Shanks on the way, Sabou said, quickly coming up with a plan. Ace and Luffy listened carefully, nodding their agreement as they did. Well, let's go get this over with then, Ace said, wanting to release all his pent-up energy from these past weeks. The stress of waiting for the pirates to attack was enough to make Ace go insane. Fine, don't be so eager to run into these things Ace, Sabou said as he walked to the door with his brothers. Luffy was snug in the middle as always, nervous energy building in him as they walked. He did like the pirates so it would be too bad if they really were turning on them right now. Then tell these things to stop happening, Ace countered as they walked out. Sabou didn't bother responding to that as they made their way through the hall and to the deck. To get to the room Whitebeard was in they had to cross the deck and go into the door on the other side, but right in that path, Teach stood, talking to someone. They definitely didn't want to go near the man, but they didn't have much choice. Huddling together they walked briskly, trying to keep anyone from stopping them, especially Teach. However, right as they passed him, Teach stopped talking to his friend and turned their way. Hey, you three are the new kids, right? Teach asked. It seemed pleasant enough. He was smiling politely and gave off a peaceful air, but knowing what was going on in that man's head, they shivered. The peaceful vibe became a threatening aura, the polite smile was much more menacing, and the pleasantness of his voice was more hostile. However, Sabou put on a polite face as well, ignoring the warning bells in his head telling him to take his brothers and run. We are, Sabou said simply, not wanting to elaborate any further. Well, it's nice to finally meet, yeah. Name's Teach, Teach said, holding out a hand. Sabou looked at the hand, knowing that the man was looking for a handshake, but couldn't quite bring himself to raise his own to meet him. Don't. Ace's simple tap was easy to catch, but Sabou couldn't just not shake the man's hand. If the pirates actually weren't turning on them it wouldn't be good to make enemies with a man who was already dangerous to them. So, swallowing his fear and anxiety, Sabou raised his hand, gripping Teach's hand in his with a tense smile. Likewise, Sabou said curtly as they shook. The millisecond that it took felt like an hour as the two stared at each other, but, finally, his hand was released and the brothers were turning on their heels, speed walking as fast as they could away from the man with the darkness. I need to wash my hand in acid, Sabou muttered with a scowl. He could almost feel the uncleanliness of the man on his hand. Ace looked at the blonde's hand with a sneer. Told you not to touch him, Ace replied. Luffy remained silent, glancing at Sabou's hand as well, practically feeling the darkness taking residence on his brother's hand. The brothers reached the door that would take them to Whitebeard quickly after that and sighed in relief. After having to talk with Teach, anything would be better than that, even the pirates turning on them. Ready? Sabou asked, raising a hand to hold the doorknob of the meeting room. Ace and Luffy nodded, giving Sabou the okay he needed to open the door. Whitebeard and Marco were the only two in the room, the captain sitting at the head with Marco in the chair right at his side. It made the three feel a bit more at ease knowing that all they had to do was get a snail phone away from these two and then book it rather than have to fight an entire room of commanders. Still, it was the two strongest people on the ship in a single room. Hello, boys. Whitebeard greeted as the brothers sat at the opposite end of the table. Good afternoon, Whitebeard, Sabou replied as he sat down. We heard you wanted to speak with us. Sabou continued as he watched the captain carefully, ready for anything. Luffy, if this does turn into a fight, Don't hide your powers. Use them to grab a snail phone so we can leave. Sabou tapped as he saw the snail phones all at the end of the table where Whitebeard was at. Luffy tapped, telling Sabou that he understood. I did. I was actually wondering something, Whitebeard said, confusing the brothers a bit. What is it? Sabou asked a bit cautiously. He didn't know what the captain could be wondering. Was it the facility? That would be the safest option to assume. He could see Ace's leg bouncing in anticipation, his fists clenching and unclenching in his lap. Well, I was wondering if you three would like to join my crew. Become my sons, Whitebeard announced, his voice sounding almost too loud in the small, quiet room. Anything that the brothers could have been imagining suddenly crashed around them at the captain's exclamation. Everything they had thought was going to happen, everything they expected to be said, none of this was it. He wants us to join? Ace asked in shock, legs ceasing its incessant bouncing, hands unclenched in his lap. Sabou couldn't even think up a response as he sat in a much similar state of shock. His eyes were as wide as Ace's and he was just barely able to keep his jaw from hanging. Luffy, for the most part, was unaffected by the question. He understood what the captain was asking, but he wasn't sure why he was asking it. Didn't they make him mad with all the tests that Sabou thought of? Why would he want them to stay? Looking over at his brothers, he realized they weren't going to answer anytime soon, and Luffy didn't need his powers to tell him they were in shock. Why? Luffy speaking snapped his brothers out of it, both of them looking between Whitebeard and Luffy, wondering what the response would be. I like you three, Whitebeard said simply as if that explained it all. Luffy? Ace needed confirmation that the man was being genuine in his words. He couldn't believe that after 3 weeks with the brothers the man liked them. He knew nothing about them. He means it, Luffy affirmed as he felt the genuine nature roll easily off the captain. Aura? Sabou asked because he was having the same doubts as Ace. Still blue. No gray. Marco too, Luffy reported. Ace and Sabou shared a look, wondering what their next step should be. How can you like us when you don't know anything about us? Sabou asked in an even tone, still unsure. Whitebeard chuckled. But I do know about you. I know you have big appetites. I know you all are brothers. I know you would do anything to keep each other safe. And I know all three of you are good people. What more do I need to know? Whitebeard asked, astounding Ace and Sabou some more while Luffy merely sat back and listened. But that doesn't mean anything. What if we aren't as good as you think? Ace asked, thinking back to all the horrible things the doctors at the facility made them do. Whitebeard shrugged. I don't, and I won't. Not unless you tell or show me, but as I know you now, I don't believe that could be possible. Whitebeard said in a confident tone. What if we become more trouble than we're worth? We've already got Marines after us, and you don't even know what happened back at the facility, Sabou added. We're pirates, Marines are already after us. What's a few more? As for the facility, it's true. I don't know what happened there, and I don't expect to know unless you want to tell me about it, but that's your past, it doesn't define who you are now. Whatever happened there has nothing to do with the person you are now. Whitebeard said, and it amazed Luffy how genuine someone could feel when they were talking. It was like the warmth, he had never felt so much of it come from one person. But it does. We are who we are because we had to be it. We aren't who we were when we went into that place, and we never will be again. Ace said angrily, fists clenched again as he fumed. Luffy frowned at the feelings coming from his brother and hated the facility even more for making him feel that way. Meanwhile, Sabou watched him in shock, not having expected that outburst from the eldest. And is that a bad thing? Marco suddenly asked, the brothers nearly forgetting he was there. What? Ace asked, confused by the question. Is it a bad thing that you've become the person you are now? Marco elaborated. Ace went silent as he thought the question over. When he didn't respond for a minute, Whitebeard spoke. I'm sure whatever you three went through back at the facility was horrible, and I don't expect you becoming my sons to change that. I know things are difficult for you three and that you'll have lasting scars, but that doesn't need to keep you back from moving forward. I want you as my sons because I like you, and I want to help you. You don't need to accept if you don't want to, but I wanted to extend the offer anyways, Whitebeard explained calmly. Silence reigned over the room once more as the brothers thought over the captain's words. They still didn't know how to feel about the whole situation, especially because, just moments ago, they had been testing the pirates on whether they were actually good people or not. If you don't mind, I think we need some time to think this over, Sabou said a bit hesitantly. Whitebeard nodded. Of course, take as much time as you need, he said, the brothers standing from their seats. Thank you, Whitebeard, Marco. We'll see you later, Sabou said as they walked to the door, leaving. They made the walk back to their room much quicker than they had made the walk to the meeting room. It helped that they weren't stopped this time. It had been another sleepless night for the brothers as they mulled over what answer they should give to Whitebeard. On one hand, they already stayed on the ship and hung around everyone. Joining wouldn't be much more different than how things already were. On the other hand, joining would mean that they would have to answer to Whitebeard as a captain. Also, if the brothers wanted to leave, it wouldn't be as easy as it would if they didn't join. Ace, for once, was unsure about what to do. He didn't feel strongly toward one side or another, and that actually shocked Sabou and Luffy more than Whitebeard's offer had. It's only because you've been trying to convince me they're good people, Ace had defended indignantly, arms crossed as he looked away from his brother's suspicious gazes. After having slept on it, albeit it having only been a few hours of sleep, the brothers were still just as far away from an answer as they had been yesterday. Maybe if we eat then we'll know, Luffy suggested, his stomach growling as he smelled breakfast. Sabou sighed but smiled at Luffy's antics. Breakfast is done now, so we may as well go and eat, Sabou said with a shrug. Ace was silent, but nodded his agreement, following his brothers out the door. They didn't know if Whitebeard had talked to everyone else about the fact that he wants the brothers to join, but not knowing made every pair of eyes that much more overbearing. They knew Whitebeard had told them they could take their time in thinking over their decision, but how long was he willing to wait? When they got to the galley and got their food they ate it silently and quickly. Right as they stood to leave though, Izo stopped them. Don't forget your wristbands today. The brothers were a bit confused as to what that meant, but Izo continued. We should be landing at Sabou today. I was just saying that you should remember those wristbands I made you if you wanted to walk around, Izo elaborated. Oh, thank you Izo, we'll be sure to wear them then, Sabou said, completely forgetting that they were supposed to be landing today. Sabou said their goodbyes and the brothers headed straight to their room. Sabou's the place Thatch was talking about, right? The one with the marine base? Ace asked as Sabou took out their wristbands that he had put in the desk drawer. The blonde nodded, handing Luffy and Ace their bands while slipping his over his wrist. It was surprisingly comfortable. It is. That means we should probably stick around the pirates or even the ship. We don't want to risk wandering over to it, Sabou said, shutting the drawer and sitting in the chair. We can't go exploring then? Luffy asked sadly, already pouting. Sabou sighed. We can't sorry. Maybe next time, when we know it'll be safer to explore, Sabou said. Luffy nodded, still obviously upset, but accepting his brother's words. In the meanwhile, we should probably discuss Whitebeard's offer more, Sabou said, leaning back in the desk chair and staring at the ceiling. We don't want to leave so joining is the best option, but we also don't want to be restricted because we joined. Ace summed up as he laid down in bed, Luffy curling up beside him. Sabou nodded with another sigh. We also know that, so far, they've passed all of our tests. I don't know, maybe these pirates really are nice and just want to help us, Sabou said, conflicted. Ace frowned at that. I don't know. What if they just want us to feel that way so they can learn about what happened in the facility? What if, when they find out, they don't want us here anymore? Ace asked. Luffy curling up closer at the mention of the facility again. The only way to know for sure would be to tell them and see what they do. There isn't really a test we could do to figure out how they would react to information like that. Sabou said in frustration, wishing things could just be easier for them. After everything the world had thrown at them, why couldn't things just be easy now? There should be, Ace muttered dryly, and suddenly, Sabou had an idea, one he knew Ace definitely would not like by any stretch of the imagination. Actually, I think there is, Sabou said a bit hesitantly, regretting the words as fast as he spoke them. Ace and Luffy sat up, both looking at Sabou in confusion. Ace, because he wanted to know what Sabou's idea was, but Luffy because he could feel the apprehension and worry coming from Sabou from the idea. What is it? Ace asked. Sabou bit his lip, looking away from his brothers. You're not going to like it, he said, hoping Ace would drop it after that, knowing he shouldn't have mentioned it in the first place. So what? I haven't liked half of your plans, but we still did them, Ace said with a scoff. Yeah, well, this isn't like my other plans, Sabou admitted, only making his brothers more curious. You can't just bring it up and not tell us, come on. Ace pushed. Sabou sighed again, this time in defeat. I warned you. The only way we can know how they'll react to having such sensitive information about us is if we tell them something equally sensitive. Sabou began. Ace raised an eyebrow at this, waiting for Sabou to continue. And I was thinking that the only other information we've got that's that important would be your father, Sabou said, not even daring to speak his name. As expected, Ace immediately grew angry, scowling and making fists. Nope. No way. Ace said immediately, not even allowing himself to think about the idea. And this is why I didn't want to tell you. That's the only thing we could do to figure out how they would react to the facility, Sabou said. Their conversation was cut short when Sabou heard that they were docking. Telling his brothers as much, they all got up and headed to the deck where they stood by the railing, out of everyone's way. They watched people get ready, heard the captain give orders, and watched people walk off the ship with smiles and coins. Alright you three, let's go touring, Thatch spoke up behind them. Turning, they saw the chef heading their way, holding out 3 bags for them to take, presumably filled with money. Thanking the chef, they each took a bag, Sabou taking Luffy's, and followed the man off the ship. You're our tour guide today? Sabou asked lightly, noticing that Thatch seemed extremely happy. That's right, good old Thatch'll show you all the hot spots here at Sabou. All while avoiding those pesky marines, Thatch announced. Luffy decided that he liked Thatch a lot, and it wasn't just because the man was radiating good emotions either. He hadn't forgotten that Thatch was one of the first people he had met, And not only that, but he was someone who kept promises and made food, which were all bonuses in Luffy's eyes. Yeah, Thatch was a good guy. Where to first then, Mr. Tour Guide? Sabo asked as he and his brothers looked around, noticing the tall mangroves and the bubbles floating up from the ground. Well, I think the most logical place to start would be groves 40 to 49, the tourist section, Thatch exclaimed as he headed, presumably, to those groves. The trio followed, watching with wonder as bubbles formed out of the ground, floating high into the sky to the point that they couldn't even see them, save for Ace and his supervision, before popping. Anything you want, I bet you'll find it here, Thatch said, gesturing his arms out wide, showing off the giant selection of stalls surrounding them. Whoa, so much stuff! Luffy exclaimed, ready to run off, but knowing he couldn't. That's right, why don't we go look around for a bit? As long as you can pay for it with what's in your pouches, you can get it, Thatch said, gesturing to their pouches of money they had been given. You mean like a hat for Ace? And Sabo too? Luffy asked, confusing Thatch a bit. However, the chef nodded. Yeah, even hats. Why do you ask? Thatch asked as Luffy practically began dragging his brothers off to the many stalls, looking specifically for one selling hats. Because Ace needs a hat like me and Sabo's, and Sabo lost his hat a long time ago, so he needs Sid, a determined look on his face as he scanned the stalls around him. Ace and Sabo were a bit surprised that Luffy remembered the fact that he wanted to get them hats, seeing as he had mentioned it so long ago. Ah, I guess that makes sense. What about that one? The chef asked, pointing to a stall that was, indeed, selling a wide variety of hats. Luffy beamed, already dragging the group that way, careful not to stretch his arms too far. Perfect, he said happily as they walked up to the cheery-looking vendor. Hello there and welcome to Humphrey's Hats. Any hat you could ever want or need can be found right here. The man, presumably Humphrey, said cheerfully. Sabo smiled to the man, seeing as Luffy was already knee-deep in hats. The stall was a standard size with hats lining the shelves behind Humphrey, as well as a few racks in front of the counter that Luffy was perusing through, picking up and inspecting hats before dropping them to the floor and moving on to the next. This left Ace and Sabo with the task of catching and returning the hats to their proper place before continuing. Thatch, however, was right by Luffy's side, helping him pull off hats and showing them off to the youngest, sometimes even placing the hats on Ace and Sabo's head so he and Luffy could see what they looked like. What about this one? Thatch asked, holding up a very jester-esque hat, to which Luffy shook his head with furrowed brows. No, maybe something more like this, he said, holding up a very bright red hat that almost looked like a mariachi hat with two black tassels hanging off of it. Thatch nodded, seemingly in understanding, as he continued his search. Who do you think he wants that hat to be for? Ace asked as he caught the red hat before it hit the ground, turning it over with a grimace. Sabo smiled wickedly at him, making him frown. If I know Luffy, probably you, Sabo said, catching a baby blue ball cap. What's that supposed to mean? Ace asked, catching a pea green knitted cap. It means that he's most likely going to find me a hat like the one I already had, whereas he's finding you a completely new one. That one looked nothing like my top hat, Sabo said, pointing back to the red one, simultaneously catching a brown fedora. Ace pouted but didn't say anything more. This one? No, more colorful. This one? No, too tall. This one? No, too glittery. Ace was thankful that Luffy didn't like the glitter bomb of a hat that Thatch had suggested. The pair continued searching with Luffy giving his criticisms as they went, and soon they were running out of hats to look at. What about this one? Luffy shouted happily as he held up a bright orange cowboy hat with two similarly orange tassels dangling down, connected by a wooden circle with a skull on it. Luffy grinned proudly as he bounced over to Ace, placing the hat down on his head. See, it's perfect, Luffy said happily as he stood back and admired his achievement. Huh, it actually does suit him, Sabo said, slightly amazed. You're right, Luffy, it looks pretty good, Thatch said, a pleased smile on his face as he took in the hat. Ace didn't know how he felt about all the attention, especially when he couldn't see what the hat looked like on him. Before he could snap though, Thatch spoke up again. I guess it's too bad we couldn't find something for Sabo here though, he said, walking up to the counter with Luffy. What are you talking about? That one's Sabo's, Luffy said, pointing to a navy blue, almost black top hat sitting on the shelf behind the vendor. Told you so, Sabo whispered to Ace, who hit Sabo's shoulder with a glare. Whatever, Ace muttered as he walked up to the counter as well. Can we have that hat, please? Luffy asked, saying the please almost as an afterthought, but beaming as he felt pride come from Sabo and felt a ruffle of his hair from Ace. Right away, Humphrey said jovially, turning and grabbing the hat and handing it over to Luffy, who placed it on Sabo's head. See, perfect, it's just like your old one, Luffy said. Here, this'll help, Barney said, pulling out a tiny mirror that they could hold. Ace took it first, looking over the orange cowboy hat and finding that he didn't hate it as much as he thought he would. Passing the mirror to Sabo, the blonde had a much similar reaction, though he hadn't expected to hate it much at all. After all, it was very similar to his old hat. Good picks, Luffy. How much for the both of them? Sabo asked. After getting a price, Sabo pulled the amount out of Luffy's pouch, handing over the money and thanking the man as they left. Alright, anything else you three are looking for? Thatch asked, his hands behind his head as he walked casually along. Accessories, Luffy announced, confusing them all once again. Accessories, Ace, Sabo, and Thatch all asked in unison. Luffy merely nodded, seeming to spot whatever stall he was thinking of and walking that way. Welcome to Abigail's Accessories, how may I help you? Abigail asked with a cheery smile. We're just looking, Sabo replied politely as Luffy gazed at the many necklaces, glasses, bags, pins, and more. Like the last stall, some were on shelves behind the vendor, some were on cases in the counter, and there was a small shelving unit in front of the stall with even more thing on it. Luffy looked through all the cases, all the shelves, looking for whatever it was he was after, and after looking into one of the cases his pensive look turned into another smile. This one, Luffy said, pointing inside the case. Abigail bent over the counter to see what Luffy was looking at, and once she recognized it she smiled. Ah, yes, the beaded twins, good choice, she said, Luffy picking the case up and putting it on the counter. And those two, he said as he peered around the woman to a pair of goggles. She nodded and grabbed the item, bringing it back to the counter with her. The beaded twins come with this necklace for free if you want it, Abigail said as she pulled out another item, a red beaded necklace. Luffy nodded happily, turning to Sabo expectantly who sighed, walking up and pulling out the necessary amount of money while Luffy happily scooped up his newly purchased items. So, what are those for Luffy? Thatch asked, confused as to why Luffy had purchased such seemingly random items. They're accessories, for Ace and Sabo's hats. They look boring without them, Luffy said, pulling Ace a bit lower so he could place the beaded twins on his hat. It was a similarly red beaded band with a smiley face and frowny face at the front that fit perfectly around Ace's hat. Luffy also put the necklace around Ace's neck before moving on to Sabo and doing the same to him, placing the goggles on his hat. They look splendid, Abigail said, clasping her hands from where she watched. Luffy beamed proudly at his purchases while Ace and Sabo looked at each other. Huh, those look familiar. It's like you never lost your old hat, Sabo, Ace said, admiring how similar to the old one Sabo's new goggles and hat looked. Can't say the same for you, Ace, you never had a hat, but you don't look too bad either. Sabo agreed, taking Ace's previous statement as a compliment. Good job, Lou, Ace and Sabo said, patting Luffy's shoulders as Luffy continued beaming proudly. After that the group walked through more stalls, getting some food and other tiny trinkets. Luffy was set on buying a telescope that one of the vendors was selling, and Ace and Sabo decided to split the price seeing as Luffy had gotten them stuff already. Now I can see like Ace, Luffy had exclaimed, looking through the scope happily as he spun around, looking at different things. Do you normally have bad eyesight? Thatch asked, confused as to what Luffy meant. No, Ace just has really good eyesight is all. He can see way better than Luffy and I, Sabo said a bit nervously. Noticing that he had slipped up, Luffy quickly apologized with taps, which the brothers responded to with a, it's fine, but be more careful. With this new knowledge, Thatch had begun he could see. What's that say? Thatch asked, pointing to a sign that the group wasn't close enough to actually read yet. Pizzazz Pizza, Ace said, seeing the sign clear as day. What about that one? Thatch asked joyfully, pointing to another sign. Freddy's Fashion Show, this was almost too easy for him. That one? Thatch asked, but it was just a bit too far for Ace to be comfortable with reading out loud. Normal people definitely couldn't see that far. Don't know, he said, ignoring the fact that he actually did know and would be keeping Luffy far away from Rory's all-you-can-eat. Man, we should if you do watch, no one would be able to sneak up on us, Thatch said with a laugh. Ace and Sabo smiled along while Luffy continued window shopping happily, enjoying all the happy feelings surrounding them. It was nice for the brothers to not have to worry about Marines noticing their numbers. It was like they were in a disguise, one that no one would notice unless their wristbands were removed. Even though the threat of Marines was still there, they were still relatively safe. Why don't we head to the amusement park now for a bit till we have to go back to the ship? Thatch asked, garnering cheers from Luffy. They were led to the giant park where they stared in amazement at all of the rides and attractions. It wasn't too long after that they were all getting on ride after ride, the sun beginning to set as they did. Alright, last one everyone, the Ferris wheel, Thatch exclaimed, gesturing to the giant wheel. The brothers, who had been smiling happily the entire time, nodded in excitement as they waited in line. The booths had 2 seats on either side, so Ace and Thatch sat on one side while Sabo and Luffy sat on the other. The bubble over the top gave the group a view of the sky while also keeping them from falling out, which was a legitimate worry when Luffy was involved. Wow, look, Sabo, we're so high, Ace, look at that, we got your hats there. Hey, I didn't know there was an all-you-can-eat place, we should go there. All in all, the day had been a good one, probably one of the best days of their lives, save for the day that they escaped the facility. Well, I guess it's time to head back to the Moby, Thatch said with a yawn after they exited the Ferris wheel. The brothers nodded in agreement, Ace stretching while Sabou and Luffy yawned as well. The walk back was quiet, except for the constant chatter from those around them, still having fun and buying souvenirs. They had just gotten back to groves 40 to 49 when Thatch and Luffy both frowned. A slight shiver ran through Luffy, and Ace and Sabou already had an idea as to why. Before they could begin any tapping or questioning though, Thatch pulled them into an alley behind some stalls and shops, hiding them all from view of the street. "What's happening?" Ace asked in a whisper, peeking out carefully as he asked. Thatch and Sabou peeked out as well, along with Luffy, though he did it much more hesitantly than the other. Darkness. Lots and lots of darkness. More than Teach and Haru. 3 people. Luffy tapped out quickly, making Ace and Sabou pale in fear. Thatch, however, didn't notice. Instead, he was glaring at the group of people heading their way down the street. Celestial dragons. Thatch spat out, the brothers watching as people began bowing, looking at the ground. The once happy and joyful feelings that had been surrounding Luffy turned to ones of fear and darkness, and Luffy hated every second of it. He only caught a glimpse of the 3 with the darkness before he had to sit down behind the stall they were hiding behind. He could barely handle this much darkness getting this close. All 3 of the people had darkness worse than Teach and Haru combined, and with 3 people having that much, it was a massive cloud heading their way that was starting to suffocate him. There was no warmth coming from Whitebeard to balance the darkness. He didn't even know if Whitebeard could make enough warmth to make a dent in it. He vaguely felt a hand on his shoulder, could barely register the fact that there was a different feeling other than darkness by him. But the darkness was too strong for him to make out what it could possibly be. The cloud rolled over him now, blanketing him in the slimy, suffocating feeling, making him close his eyes as he attempted to catch his breath. In what seemed like hours, the cloud finally rolled past him and continued on, much to Luffy's relief as he gulped in the clean, fresh air. "You alright, Luffy?" Ace asked beside him, rubbing his back. Luffy nodded, noticing that he had been sweating and trembling. "Can you walk?" Sabou asked, worry on his face. Luffy honestly didn't know, but the second he tried to stand he fell back down. "No," his voice was quiet and timid, barely getting the word out. There wasn't a second's hesitation as Ace hoisted Luffy up onto his back, Sabou helping make sure he was secure before they left the safety of the alley. "Do you want me to call the nurses?" Thatch asked a bit hesitantly. He knew of the brothers' dislike of nurses, but whatever Luffy had gone through back there looked serious. Sabou roughly shook his head. "No, he'll be fine, don't worry," Sabou said tensely, still frowning. Thatch felt a bit conflicted, but nodded, deciding it would do more harm to call them right now. He would talk to Pops about it when they got back and see what the captain thought was best. "Well, are you feeling better, Luffy?" Thatch asked, hoping to see the bright happy teen he had seen all day. Luffy, however, did not look like that now. He looked tired, pale, and sweaty as he clung to Ace. Don't worry, I'm fine," Luffy mumbled, not enjoying the worry and nervousness coming from the chef. It was better when he felt happy, warm feelings, not ones that made him want to worry and be nervous too. A hand on his back and pulses of warmth from his brothers calmed him down before any more of the worry from the chef could affect him. Apparently, he was much more susceptible to feeling other people's feelings when he was this tired. Good to know. Which reminded him, he never told Ace and Sabou about the fact that he could feel people using haki. Well, that would have to wait. When they were back at the Moby, they avoided questions of whether Luffy was okay or not with answers that he was fine and just tired. When the brothers finally made it to their room, Ace deposited Luffy onto their bed while Sabou put the telescope on the desk, along with his and Ace's hats. "What happened back there, Lou?" Sabou asked gently as he moved to sit on the bed. Luffy shrugged, curling into a ball on his side, facing the brothers. "Lots of darkness. I couldn't breathe, and it got dark," Luffy said with a shiver, still feeling a bit icky from how much darkness had passed over him. "It's over now, that's all that matters. We'll just have to make celestial dragons one of the people we stay far away from," Ace said with a sneer as he mentioned the name of those bastards. Sabou and Thatch had briefed him on what a celestial dragon was, even going as far as to mention the slaves they kept, and Ace couldn't figure out if he hated them more than the doctors at the facility or not. "Thatch is coming," Sabou said, getting up and heading to the door. "He brought something yummy," Luffy said with a small smile. Sabou chuckled a bit at that, opening the door after the first knock and greeting the chef with a smile. "Hi, there, Thatch. What's up?" Sabou asked casually, finding no need to use politeness when he was still strained from Luffy's panic attack. If that's even what it could be called. "Well, I brought this for Luffy. I thought it might help him feel a little better," Thatch said, holding a large glass full of a pink liquid. "It's a smoothie I made, has lots of fruits and things." Thatch explained a bit quickly as he handed the glass over to Sabou, who took it with a smile. "Thank you, Thatch. I'm sure you'll love it. Good night," Sabou said. Thatch saying a quick good night and calling out a feel better to Luffy hat was nice of him, Sabou said as he looked at the smoothie, walking over to the bed where Ace helped Luffy sit up. I like Thatch. He's a good guy. Luffy said, happily taking the smoothie from Sabou, using the straw to drink it as fast as possible. Slow down a little, Lou. Is he Marco and Whitebeard good, or just good? Ace asked as he made Luffy slow down a bit in drinking. The youngest seemed to think about it for a minute, Ace and Sabou waiting patiently for a response. He keeps promises, and he hid us from the darkness, and he helped us escape, and he makes good food, and his color's still blue, so I think he's a good guy. Like Marco and Mr. Whitebeard. Luffy determined, returning to sipping his drink happily. Ace and Sabou took in this new information, knowing now that Thatch was someone that they could be around without worry. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you guys, but I can feel when someone uses hockey, Luffy suddenly exclaimed as he finished his smoothie. Huh? Ace and Sabou asked, shocked and confused. When I got lost and Marco was bringing me back to you, I felt him use his hockey so that he could find you, Luffy explained. That's new. Did you ever feel that before? Sabou asked. I don't think so, Luffy said, trying to remember if he had felt mystery feelings coming from anyone. We haven't been around much hockey to begin with though, Ace said with a shrug. That's true, we never really needed to use it, huh? Sabou said as he thought back to their time in the facility. The times they had used it hadn't exactly been good times for Luffy to focus on someone's feelings either. Well, it's good you figured that out, Luffy. It could become helpful later. Why don't we go to bed now though? It's been a long day. Sabou said, taking the empty glass from Luffy and putting it on their desk. His brothers agreed and all of them got comfy. What happened out there, son? Whitebeard asked, having seen how Luffy looked when he had come back to the ship, carried by Ace. I don't really know, Oyaji. One second he was fine, the next he was. I don't know, panicking? Thatch said, a bit unsure. Tell us what was happening before that, Yoi, Marco suggested. The commanders and captain were sitting in the meeting room, whiskey as well, as Thatch gave a retelling of whatever had happened on Sabou. Okay, well, we had just finished at the amusement park. The brothers seemed happy and stuff, and since it was getting dark we decided to head back here. Thatch began, trying to remember exactly what had happened. And then when we got to the tourist section I noticed that there was a group of celestial dragons coming, Thatch continued with a scowl. None of them liked the dragons, so there was a similar reaction among the commanders. So I took them to a nearby alley so we didn't get spotted by them. 1 second we're peeking out at them. The next Luffy's sitting against the wall and can barely breathe. Ace and Sabou were trying to calm him down, but when it didn't do anything they just went silent and waited. Ace asked who the dragons were and Sabou and I explained them to him, and once they were gone, Luffy was fine. Thatch finished, still worried for the boy. What were his symptoms? Whiskey asked, thinking maybe if she couldn't see the boys themselves, she could figure out a way to help without having to actually talk to them. Symptoms? Well, he was shaking a lot. Looked like he couldn't breathe, pale, sweating, didn't look like he could hear us either. Thatch said, thinking back to how Luffy had acted. Whiskey frowned as she thought. It sounds like he could have had a panic attack. A major one at that, Whiskey said, a bit more to herself than to others. A panic attack? Haruta asked, not having been expecting that answer. By the sounds of it, yes. Whiskey affirmed. What caused it though? The celestial dragons? Kindu asked. It's possible, however, Ace didn't know who the dragons were. Whiskey said as they all tried to figure out what had triggered the attack. But Sabou knew about them. You said he explained what they were to Ace with you, right? Fosa asked. Thatch who nodded. Even if that were the case, wouldn't they all know who they were? Not just Sabou and maybe Luffy? Curiel asked. What else could it have been though? Jozu asked. Panic attacks can be triggered by anything. It's possible that it had nothing to do with the dragons and Luffy simply saw something familiar in the background that caused it. We won't know unless they tell us, Whiskey said with a sigh. Is there anything we can do to help him? Izo asked. For now, I think we should just give them some space. Thatch brought over a smoothie which should help get something in his stomach at least. Whiskey said with a sigh, none of them liking that they couldn't do anything. Why don't we all go get some much needed rest then? Tomorrow we can keep an eye on the brothers and make sure they're okay. Whitebeard suggested, everyone reluctantly nodding as they began standing and leaving the room. They would just have to take things one step at a time. The next morning the brothers all woke up feeling well rested, which was a nice change for them. Once they were a bit more awake Luffy started to look around in confusion. What's wrong, Lou? Ace asked as he and Sabou put on their new hats. Teach is gone, Luffy said in confusion, eyebrows scrunched together. Gone? What do you mean gone? Ace asked a bit frantically. He's not on the ship anymore, Luffy said, head tilted now as he determined this. Calm down guys, maybe he's on the island. Besides, it's better for us when he's not here. Sabou said with a sigh, understanding why this could worry the two but seeing no use in worrying about it right now. And don't forget, we still have to give an answer to Whitebeard on whether we're joining or not, Sabou added as they all got ready for the day. But we still don't know, Luffy said, knowing that this was going to be a difficult choice for them. Exactly, which is why, tell them about, you know who, Ace said suddenly, shocking both Ace and Luffy. But Ace, that's your secret, Luffy said in a whispered shout, knowing how much that secret meant to his brother. Yeah, well it doesn't matter anyway. The Marines are already after us, so if they find out about it then, whatever, Ace said, trying to play off the seriousness of the situation but knowing he wasn't fooling anyone. Ace, hold on, we can think of something else. I told you already, that was a stupid plan I should have never mentioned, Sabou said, trying to deter his brother from giving away something he held so close to him. No, you were right before Sabou. There's no way to know how they'll react to the facility without telling them something equally important, Ace said. Sabou's eyes narrowed. Why are you so ready to tell them now? Yesterday you were quite adamant we keep that a secret. It wasn't even up for negotiation, Sabou said, crossing his arms accusatorily. Ace frowned, also crossing his arms as he looked away. Yeah, well, a lot of stuff happened yesterday. I was just thinking that. Maybe these guys can be nice. Thatch kept us hidden from those dragon people, and he didn't try anything when Luffy had an attack. We've also tested random pirates and they were good too, so maybe these people would be okay to join, Ace said, and it sounded like the words he was saying were extremely reluctant. Sabou and Luffy knew that Ace must have thought a lot about this before bringing it up. And you're sure this is what you want to do, Ace? Once we tell them, there's no taking it back, Sabou said in worry, not wanting him to make any rash decisions. I'm sure, Sabou. Like I said, the Marines are already after me, so even if they go and rat on me, it won't be much different than it is now, Ace said, once again trying to be nonchalant about the whole thing. Sabou sighed, shaking his head as he noticed this. That's not what makes this a big deal and you know it, Sabou said, because it was true. Ace could care less if Marines went after him. It was the fact that he would be associated with Roger that made him want to keep it a secret in the first place. It doesn't matter, Ace muttered, wanting to be off this subject now. Luffy watched silently, taking in the different emotions coming from his brothers. It had been a long time since Luffy had felt Ace feel nervous, not because of an outside force, but because of himself. Normally, whenever Ace was nervous it was because of a new test, or because Luffy was in trouble, but not because he was doing something himself to be nervous about. If we're doing this, then we need to all be sure about the pirates. There hasn't been any gray? Sabou asked Luffy, going over the good person checklist. Luffy shook his head. Nope, only blue, Luffy reported happily, all of them ignoring the fact that Teach most definitely was not blue. And they did manage to pass all the tests. No one's gotten any weird vibes? Ace, you didn't see anyone doing anything suspicious? Sabou asked. It was another no from the eldest as he thought back to everything he'd seen aboard the Moby. I haven't heard anything either. We can tell Whitebeard and Marco after breakfast if you're sure. If they don't attack us right away then I think we should wait until we've been here a month, to make sure they don't go and tell any Marines. Sabou reasoned, Ace and Luffy nodding their agreement to yet another plan. It seemed the whole brothers' lives revolved around planning. With all of that said and done the brothers headed off to breakfast where everyone was already chowing down. It was relieving for the brothers to not have to worry about Teach in the meanwhile, but also a bit unnerving seeing as they didn't know where he was or when he would pop back up. The three ate in silence per usual, Sabou listening in on conversations and finding out Marco had begun getting suspicious about the betting going on around Thatch's fishing poles. Haruta seemed more than a bit bummed out that his game was cut off preemptively. When the brothers were finishing Sabou decided now was the time to speak up. Turning to the captain he put on another polite smile. We were wondering if we could talk to you and Marco after you were finished, Whitebeard, Sabou requested, some of the commanders looking a bit shocked or confused, whereas Whitebeard and Marco merely looked to expect this, which they should have. Of course, Whitebeard said, the brothers nodding as they began to leave. They didn't have to wait long, and soon Whitebeard, Marco, and the brothers were once again in the same meeting room as before, sitting in the same spots. Have you come to a decision? Whitebeard asked. Not quite. But we did have something we wanted to tell you just so you know a little more about who you'd be taking aboard your crew, Sabou said, his words coming out a bit slow as he waited for Ace to interrupt, should he decide that he'd rather keep his secret. The eldest, however, remained completely silent. His leg was bouncing again in anticipation and his arms were crossed as he stared at the wooden table they were sat at. Oh, what is it? Whitebeard asked. When Ace still didn't say anything to stop the information from coming out, Sabou sighed, ready to tell. What would you think if Roger had a son? You know, Gold Roger? Ace suddenly asked instead, and Sabou had to keep from saying anything. They were, after all, about to tell them that his son was right there. Not seeming to be expecting the question, both Marco and Whitebeard raised an eyebrow. I don't think it should matter. His son is his own person, and in the end, we're all children of the sea, Whitebeard said casually, shocking the brothers. Every time Ace had asked that questions he had been met with laughs, people saying his son was a demon and should die like his father had, but no one had ever said that. It didn't matter. Sabou, who had witnessed Ace ask this question a few times and had seen the responses did, was also amazed by the response. Luffy was making sure to pay attention to the feelings coming from the two pirates, and when no anger or hate came up in response to Ace's questions he was surprised as well. "Why do you ask?" Marco asked, breaking the brothers out of their shock. "Well, Sabou cleared his throat, again, waiting for Ace to stop him. "I'm his son," Ace said bitterly, a scowl on his face. The eldest began watching the two carefully, waiting for their response, while Sabou and Luffy tensed, ready to fight for their brother if necessary. "Gararara, is that all?" Whitebeard asked, only proving to throw the brothers into shock again. "Is that all? What's that supposed to mean? I'm the old pirate king's son, your old rival's son," Ace explained as if the two pirates didn't know who Gold D. Roger was. Whitebeard, who was still smiling, merely shrugged. "We may have been rivals, and he may have been the pirate king, but as I said before, you are your own person," Whitebeard repeated, and Luffy could feel that Whitebeard genuinely meant his words, telling his brothers as much. It was quiet now as the brothers got over their shock. Balance was broken by Marco. "That would mean you three aren't blood-related then?" Marco asked, picking up on the way Ace had specifically said Roger was his father, neglecting to say he was their father. Besides, Roger was a faithful man, and he hadn't exactly lived long enough to have children as young as Luffy. "No, we're sworn brothers, we all have different parents," Sabou answered, still a bit shell-shocked. Whitebeard and Marco both nodded in understanding. "Was that all you three wanted to talk about?" Whitebeard asked, the brothers realizing that it was time to end the conversation now. "Ah, yes, it was. Thank you, Whitebeard, Marco, for taking the time to listen." Sabou thanked as he and his brothers stood. "It was no problem," Whitebeard said as Ace and Luffy walked out the door. Sabou, though, paused in the doorway, turning around to face the pirates again. "And about your offer, we'll have an answer by the end of the month," Sabou said as if he had forgotten to mention it before. Whitebeard smiled and nodded. "Don't worry about it, take all the time you need," the captain said with a wave. The blonde smiled, nodding to the pirates again, and left, closing the door behind him. Ace and Luffy were waiting for him a few feet away, having noticed that he wasn't following, and Sabou quickly caught up, the three heading back to the deck. "Well, that went better than expected," Sabou said, still a bit stunned by the results of their confession to Whitebeard. Luffy grinned. "I told you Mr. Whitebeard and Marco were good people," Luffy said matter-of-factly. "We didn't think they weren't, it's just that even good people can turn bad when they hear certain things," Sabou explained to Luffy, who took the information in. "Oh. Well, Whitebeard and Marco didn't, so they're the best good people," Luffy said. Ace rolled his eyes, knocking the boy's straw hat off and ruffling his hair. "Yeah, for now at least. We still have to wait and see if they go and tell on us," Ace said, and even though he said it casually and looked calm, Sabou knew he was probably freaking out about this still. Luffy knew, for a fact, that Ace was freaking out though because he could feel it, the turmoil of feelings, the fear, the worry, the nervousness. The Raven tried to block the feelings and instead sidled up to Ace, giving him a hug that stopped both of them from walking. "It'll be okay, Ace, they didn't turn gray and they meant the words they said, and they weren't lying. I don't think they'll tell anyone," Luffy assured confidently. Sabou, who had stopped walking to watch his brothers, smiled, crossing his arms as he looked to Ace expectantly, waiting for his response. The eldest looked a bit flustered, like he didn't know how to respond to Luffy's comforts, and truth be told, he probably didn't. "You know we can't hide anything from him. I don't know why you even try," Sabou said with a shake of his head. Ace regained his composure, sending Sabou a defiant glare, though there was no heat behind it. "Yeah, whatever. Thanks, Luffy. I feel better now," Ace said a bit reluctantly, hugging the youngest back for a second. Luffy released his hold, beaming at Ace as he felt all the bad feelings melt away, replaced with the warmth and love that Luffy was used to. "Good. I don't like it when Ace or Sabou feel bad feelings," Luffy said, grin remaining as he began leading the way, leaving his two slightly dumbfounded brothers behind. They caught up quickly though, and the three reached the door that led to the deck. Opening it, Sabou took note of everyone in their vicinity, noticing that Whitebeard and Marco were finally leaving the meeting room, having been talking by themselves after the brothers left. "Hey you guys, how was your chat with Pops and Marco?" Thatch asked from where he was standing near the door. Sabou put on a smile as he addressed the chef. "It went very well," Sabou said truthfully. Thatch grinned wider at those words. "Well, that's good to hear. Hey, do you three want to head back out to the island today? It's our last day on Sabou, seeing as the Mobi's almost fully coated now," Thatch explained. Sabou didn't even have to look at his brothers or wait for their input to know they wouldn't be going onto the island again anytime soon. "No, I think we're just going to stay here for the day. If you wouldn't mind though, could you explain what coating is? You mentioned it before," Sabou said, having been curious since Thatch first brought it up in the infirmary when Ace was injured. "Oh, yeah. The only way to get to Fishman Island is to sink to the bottom of the ocean, and the only way to do that is to get a coating on your ship. It's like a big bubble that surrounds the ship so that we can breathe and allows the ship to sink," Thatch explained to the best of his ability. Luffy looked amazed while Sabou looked thoughtful and Ace looked a bit unsure. That's interesting. I would have never thought something like that was possible. When are we leaving for Fishman Island? Sabou asked, noticing that Teach still wasn't anywhere near, from what he could hear. I think we're leaving close to dinner. Rayleigh, our shipcoder, has been working pretty hard to get us ready as fast as possible, Thatch said, glancing around for who Sabou assumed to be Rayleigh. Is there a reason you're rushing? Ace asked. After yesterday he was a bit more comfortable around Thatch and deemed the man worthy of conversation. Not really, but there have been a few rookies who thought they were big shots that have been messing around, and seeing as Fishman Island is under Pop's protection we have to go stop them before they do anything too stupid, Thatch said with a bit of a chuckle. Anyways, since you three are staying on the ship today, why don't we do some fishing? I've been meaning to lately but I've been a bit busy, what with the lack of chefs to help me in the kitchen with that sickness, Thatch said, reminding the three that Thatch had been working pretty hard lately because most of the chefs had been out of commission. Are the chefs better? Luffy questioned, a bit concerned for them. Sabou and Ace didn't know if he was more worried about the people themselves, or the food that they couldn't make. They are, and to top it off, the rest of my division came back from their mission, so we've got more hands than usual, Thatch said happily, the happiness rubbing off on Luffy who suddenly became jittery with the good feeling. Come on Ace, come on Sabou, let's go fishing with Thatch, Luffy said, practically bouncing where he stood as he grabbed his brother's hands. The brothers recognized the sudden spike in Luffy's energy to possibly be from the chef's good feelings rubbing off on the youngest, but it wasn't doing him any harm so they decided to let it slide. Sure, it sounds fun, Sabou said with a smile. Yeah, why not, I needed something to do anyway. Ace said with a shrug, though he was smiling as well. Alright, let's go. Hey, did you know that Ruto was keeping me from putting away my fishing pole for almost a month? That guy, I swear. He nearly made Marco kill me. The brothers suppressed their laughter, Sabou putting on his best, really, I can't believe that, face as he began sympathizing with the chef. The day passed by slowly, the three brothers fishing with Thatch until the chef had to go make lunch. When lunch came and passed and they realized Teach still wasn't back at the Moby, the three became disconcerted, and Luffy took it upon himself to go ask the captain where the man was. Walking up to his chair after lunch and doing the same thing he had done when he warned the captain of the man. He walked up to his leg where Whitebeard brought a hand down, lifting Luffy up to his ear where the boy whispered quietly to him. Where's Teach? He asked, wanting to know for everyone's safety. Whitebeard pulled the boy away, a serious expression on his face. He's been sent on a mission. We have someone watching him, Whitebeard said in a tone that told the brothers he was taking their warning to heart, something that relieved them to know. Luffy happy that they wouldn't be near the man for a bit, but a little unnerved that he had no idea what he was up to. After that the three had lounged around, not wanting to risk going on the island and running into a celestial dragon, but not having anything better to do. Most of the pirates were off enjoying themselves on the island, only a few lingering behind, namely the captain and a handful of commanders. Atmos, Kingdu, Jiru, Blenheim, Vista, Fosa, Curiel, and Rikuyo were off on the island while Izo, Namur, Thatch, Marco, Haruta, and Jozu were on the ship. After cloud gazing had gotten boring, the brothers were left with nothing to do until Thatch sauntered up to them, smile plastered on his face as he did. Time for some fun, he exclaimed with a clap of his hands. Sabou and Ace raised an eyebrow while Luffy became excited, ready to do anything other than what he was doing. And what exactly does that entail? Sabou asked, not quite sure what to expect from the chef. Thatch made a TS King noise, wagging his finger in a no motion. No, we don't want to ruin the surprise, after all, that's half the fun. Thatch said happily, still smiling as he gestured for the brothers to follow him. A bit unsure and plenty skeptical, Ace and Sabou looked to Luffy for reassurance, to which the youngest nodded, stating there were no bad feelings from Thatch. So, with that, the three began to follow Thatch, curious as to what his surprise was. They ended up following him into the galley, and then into the kitchen which the brothers had never been in before. They followed him until they reached a station in the corner where Thatch pulled up some stools to the giant counter for the brothers to sit at while he moved to one of the many fridges to get something. They all watched curiously as he began pulling out random things, from eggs and milk to flour and sugar, but having no clue what he was up to. All set, Thatch said finally, hands on his hips and smile on his lips as he stood proudly behind the mountain of ingredients on the table. What exactly is it? Sabou asked for all of them, noticing that even Luffy looked confused now. Thatch's smile never faltered though as he began explaining. Well, you three like to eat and it's been a while since we've had some sweets on board, so I've decided that tonight we can have some desserts after dinner and I wanted you three to help, it's a lot better than doing nothing after all, Thatch said as he rolled up his sleeves in preparation. Ace and Sabou looked at each other, shrugging, while Luffy merely smiled, only really understanding that food was involved. Alright, we'll help, Ace said as he turned back to face Thatch who cheered happily. Yes, first step, washing our hands, and so the brothers helped Thatch make a variety of desserts. Ace was in charge of a wide array of cookies, from peanut butter to chocolate chip to regular sugar cookies. Sabou was making cakes, chocolate, vanilla, 3-tiered, 2-tiered, and even a few dozen cupcakes as well. Luffy, on the other hand, was a bit of a different story. His brothers knew that letting Luffy near food preparation was a bad idea in itself, but Thatch had seemed to find a way to divert the youngest from eating all the unbaked goodies by providing him with breads and dips to eat as he helped Thatch make puddings, pies, and even some homemade ice cream. Ace and Sabou had to admit, they were amazed to see the youngest following directions so well. The boy completely focused on mixing fillings without losing a single drop. "Good job, Luffy. Now, why don't you pour that into the pie while I go put these puddings in the fridge?" Thatch said as he picked up trays with pudding and cups on it. Luffy nodded happily as the chef left and Sabou watched the straw-hatted teen carefully pour the filling into the pie tin. "Did you see that, Sabou? I did it," Luffy exclaimed happily as he quickly chowed down on another few pieces of bread. Sabou smiled, setting down the bowl of frosting he had just mixed up. "I did, good job, Lu, it looks good so far," Sabou said, meaning it too. It made Luffy beam in delight as Thatch walked back, explaining that they were going to cover the pie in more crust while Sabou turned his attention to Ace, who was also surprisingly following directions pretty well. The oldest had his own bowl of breads and dips to munch on as he mixed batters and put cookie dough on trays to bake. The group continued on in their baking, and soon it was already time for dinner to start cooking, the other chefs coming into the kitchen and cooking in their own sections of the giant kitchen. As they finished up their baking, the chefs were announcing that they were done making the food, Thatch saying that they could start serving now while the brothers washed up. "Thank you guys for helping. I don't know if I could have gotten that all done on my own," Thatch admitted as he dried his hands off. "It was no problem," Sabou said as he dried his own hands off, ignoring the fact that Ace and Luffy were in a bit of a splashing war with each other. "Yeah, I had lots of fun," Luffy said, stopping the war for a split second to direct his attention to the chef. "Me too," Ace said quickly before flicking more water towards Luffy, who retaliated with his own flick of water, which was more of him throwing a handful of water towards the eldest. Sabou sighed, shaking his head and pinching his nose at his brother's antics while Thatch merely began laughing. "Come on you two, if you don't stop now all the food'll be gone," Sabou said sternly, even though he knew that wasn't true. The more they got to know Thatch, the more comfortable they became around him, and if past experience was anything to go on, the man would save them something regardless of how long they took. The man looked like he wanted to voice this, but before he could, Ace and Luffy looked at Sabou with wide eyes. "Luffy, move. I gotta finish washing my hands." "No, you move. I was washing mine first. I don't want to miss the meat. I'm older, so I should get to go first." "Nah. Just cause you're older doesn't mean anything. I'm gonna wash mine first." "No you're not. I am." "No," Sabou could only pinch his nose harder in exasperation. "That was delicious," Ace said happily as he patted his stomach, the three brothers walking out on the deck. "It was. I can't believe it's been so long since I've had a cookie," Sabou said, trying to remember the last time he'd had one. "Yeah, Makino made the best cookies," Luffy reminisced happily, eyes going a bit distant as he remembered everyone back on Dawn Island. "Everything ready?" "Yeah, all set, Captain. Go ahead." "Alright then, inflate it. What's going on?" Ace asked in a mumble, his brothers shrugging in response, just as confused as him. They watched curiously as suddenly a giant bubble began inflating around the ship, encasing them all safely within it. "Whoa, sugoi," Luffy said in awe as he watched the bubble inflate until it was over the entire ship. "We're heading down to Fishman Island now, yoi. We should be there after lunch tomorrow," Marco said as he walked up to the awestruck brothers. "So it really is at the bottom of the sea? Thatch mentioned it earlier, but I didn't really think there was an island at the bottom of the ocean," Sabou said as he watched the crew getting ready to do something else. "Sure is. Say goodbye to the sky cause all we're gonna see down there is water for a while," Izo said as he walked up as well, watching his crewmates hurry around the deck. "We're good here too. Looks like we're about to descend," Marco said, crossing his arms over his chest. And he was right. After he said that, the ship began to sink, but no water came through the bubble, everyone safe inside of it. "Whoa, Sabou, Ace, look, we're going underwater," Luffy said as he rushed over to the railing to look. His brothers followed, both equally amazed as they watched the water slowly cover them completely until they were fully submerged, fish swimming peacefully around them and roots tangling down trees. The brothers remained at the railing in amazement for a good hour after that before Luffy began to yawn and they decided they should probably get some sleep. They said goodnight to Marco and Izo as they left the deck, heading for their room. Today had been one of their good days, especially seeing as Teach was no longer around. It was a challenge to get Luffy to eat for the first time ever. The boy was so excited to go out on the deck and watch for Fishman Island that getting him to sit in the galley and eat lunch was harder than it should have been. The young teen kept trying to fill his mouth and run, but Sabou and Ace had learned by now and were holding a leg down each to keep him from bolting away without them. It wasn't that Luffy didn't want to eat, because the day that happened the brothers would panic. It was more that Luffy was so excited about the new island that it was distracting him until he remembered that there was food. Needless to say, lunch went by much faster than usual despite these difficulties. With Luffy scarfing food down faster than ever, the three were done pretty quickly, Ace and Sabou eating to match his pace so they could keep the youngest from finishing before them and having nothing to do. Besides, if he did finish before them, it would be much harder to keep him in the galley while they finished. When they were all done eating, Luffy practically jumped out of his seat, grabbing his brother's hands. "Come on, I want to go look for the new island," Luffy said excitedly as he pulled his brothers out of the galley and along the deck to the rails. The crew around them all smiled at Luffy's eagerness, watching as he leaned over the rail to look through the tough bubble. "Look at that. Oh, and that. And look over there, it's a turtle." Some chuckled at his enthusiasm as they did their chores or walked past, enjoying how happy Luffy looked to just see some fish up close. "Ace, do you see the island yet?" Luffy asked as he tried peering through the darkness for any signs of it. "How would I be able to see anything down here?" Ace asked, only for show because, really, he could see it, and it was an amazing sight. "Yeah, I see it, it's inside in a bubble, which is inside another bubble. Also, it's weirdly light in there, and I'm pretty sure I'm seeing a sky and clouds even though we're pretty deep in the water." Ace tapped as he scanned what he knew to be Fishman Island. "So that's what that weird light is," Sabou mused, seeing a dim light in the middle of all the darkness surrounding them. It was still pretty far away, but they would be there in about a half hour to an hour judging by how far away it was. "How can there be sky and clouds underwater?" Luffy asked, though his excitement was only growing at the thought. "Who knows? I don't even know if I'm seeing that right," Ace replied as he tried squinting, wondering what could possibly look so similar to sky and clouds without actually being sky and clouds. "We'll just have to wait to find out," Sabou said as he leaned on the railing, having a feeling that Luffy wasn't going to be leaving anytime soon. He was right. The half hour it took for them to get to Fishman Island, Luffy stood rapidly at the railing, switching between talking silently to his brothers about all the cool stuff they would see and talking out loud to the occasional commander that would come by. Ace, in the meanwhile, took the time to think back to everything that had happened to them recently. First, the whitebeard pirates saved them from the facility, where they had previously been trapped for 7 whole years of their lives. Then, they were accepted on board this ship, no questions asked, and that was still something he was trying to get used to. He was just waiting for someone to get fed up and demand to know what had happened in the facility, but again, that had yet to happen. Then, the brothers were asked to join the crew, actually join, and that was an even bigger shocker than everything else. It's one thing to accept some kids traveling on board for a while, but to actually want them to stay, permanently? It was mind-boggling to him. And then there was the biggest shock of all. His parentage. Of all the possibilities that came with telling people who his parents were, Whitebeard's and Marco's were nowhere near close to the top of the list. In fact, they were probably as close to the bottom as they could be. They just accepted him. His parents, Gold D. Roger was his father, and all they had to say about it was that it didn't matter, which was one of the biggest lies he'd ever heard. Of course it mattered to the entire world, to the Marines, to Roger's enemies. He was the devil's son, someone everyone thought should have died the second he was born, regardless of the fact that he was just an innocent child. In the eyes of the world, just having the man's blood was a crime worthy of death, and yet Whitebeard and Marco had no problems with the information at all. They had accepted it as easily as they accepted the brothers on board their ship. For there to be no fuss about his parents, for the pirates to just accept him, he couldn't understand it. However, he was forced to stop thinking about all of this when Luffy began tugging on his hand, happily exclaiming that they were almost there. He would just have to worry about all of this later. As they arrived, they saw the entrance to Fishman Island open, Sabou hearing guards inside announcing that Whitebeard was arriving as they did. The ship coasted in easily and soon the brothers were staring in awe again as they looked up at the clouds, the sky, the fishmen, women and mermaids, men. So there was clouds and a sky. Ace muttered quietly as he looked up, pleased to know that his enhanced eyesight wasn't playing tricks on him. The crew around them immediately got to work on docking the ship and within minutes they were getting ready to disembark. "Marco, Thatch, when you take the boys can you go look for Jinbei? I'll need to speak to him about everything that's happened since we've last been here," Whitebeard said as he addressed the different duties of all the crew members. The two commanders nodded and when everyone was ready they headed to the brothers. "Alright you three, you ready?" Thatch asked with a smile. Double checking that they were all wearing their wristbands, Sabou nodded. Even if this was a Whitebeard protected island, they still didn't want to take any chances. "Then let's go, Yoi," Marco said as he led the way off the ship. Luffy could barely contain himself as he skipped alongside his brothers, the older two holding his hands so he couldn't run off alone. As they walked, everyone they passed gave them smiles once they saw they were with the Whitebeards, and many began whispering happily to each other. Sabou picking up that they were excited to see the pirates again. "Nay, Marco, where do you think Jinbei is?" Thatch asked from where he stood at the front of the group beside Marco. "I don't think we need to worry too much, Yoi. He'll probably find us. For now, why don't we take the brothers to the shopping section?" Marco asked, turning to get the brothers' opinions. "Yeah, come on Ace, Sabou, let's go shopping," Luffy cheered happily. The two saw no reason why they shouldn't so they nodded as well, and once again followed Marco and Thatch to the many shops set up in town. Of course, one of these shops had the words, "John's Candy Shop," printed clearly on it, and that enticed Luffy immediately. "Candy, Ace, Sabou, let's go get some candy," Luffy said, pulling his brothers toward the shop, Marco and Thatch following with bemused expressions on their faces. "We can get some candy, Luffy, but not a lot. Too much sugar isn't good for you." Sabou compromised, knowing that the boy had a tendency to go overboard, and he did not want to see what Luffy was like with that much sugar in him. After being dragged into the store and fighting to keep Luffy from eating everything, the group left with a good-sized bag of candy, Luffy attempting to swipe something from it every few seconds. "You know, I don't blame him for being eager. The candy they make here is supposedly some of the best in the world," Thatch commented as he watched Ace raise the bag just out of reach of Luffy's grabby hands. "That may be the case, but I think it's best for us all if we limit Luffy's intake," Sabou said with a smile as he allowed Luffy to have one he bag. As they browsed through different stores, another thing that caught Luffy's eye was the bubbly coral. "Look Sabou, look Ace, it makes bubbles," Luffy said as he tested one of the corals they had on display. "It's for humans, so they can be mobile in water and still breathe if they need to, yoi," Marco explained, pulling out one of his own bubbly corals that he had brought along. "Really? That's so cool, we have to get one," Luffy said, already grabbing some off the shelves for him and his brothers. This was mostly how the rest of the shopping trip went. Luffy would read a sign, and Sabou would curse himself forever teaching the glutton how to read. Every time they would go in, Luffy would manage to somehow rope Ace and Sabou into yet another purchase. This probably would have continued for the rest of the day had they not been interrupted. "Thatch, Marco, it's good to see you two again," a voice spoke up, drawing everyone's attention toward it. "Ah, Jinbei, so you did find us after all," Thatch said with a smile as he greeted the blue fishman. The brothers watched the newcomer skeptically for a moment while Luffy got a read of the man's aura and feelings. "I did. I heard Oyaji docked not too long ago and thought I would try to come find you guys. I had a feeling you would be closer to the boat or restocking near the docking section. What brings you to the tourist section?" Jinbei asked with a raised eyebrow. "What's he look like, Lou?" Ace asked, knowing that any second this Jinbei person's attention would be on them. "Blue. No bad feelings," Luffy determined after a second, blinking as he turned his attention to the eldest. "That would be because of these three, yoi," Marco said as he gestured to the brothers. Sabou and Luffy gave Jinbei smiles, Sabou deciding he would be polite, yet cautious around the man. Meanwhile, Ace was giving the fishman a calculating look, arms crossed as he decided if it was okay to be near this guy. "Oyaji's recruiting youngsters now?" Jinbei asked curiously as he looked over the teens. Luffy pouted now but didn't sense maliciousness in the words. "Not exactly. These three are a special case. Maybe we'll tell you about it later," Thatch said with a nonchalant shrug which Jinbei seemed to expect. "Hi, I'm Sabou, and these are my brothers. Luffy's the youngest and Ace is the oldest." Sabou introduced politely, seeing that now was a good time to do it. "It's nice to meet you three, I'm Jinbei." Jinbei greeted just as politely, and Luffy decided he liked the fishman. He could feel the loyalty in him, and that was a good feeling. "Oyaji wanted to talk to you about a report when you've got the time, yoi," Marco said after introductions were over. "I know, I met up with him at the Mobi when I was looking for you. Which reminds me, I was recently at the Ryugu Palace and Neptune wanted to greet you personally. He'd like for you to come see him," Jinbei said as he looked up. The brothers followed his gaze, Sabou and Luffy just making out something in the distance, but Ace could see that it was a weird blockade like the entrance that led to another bubble above it. Inside that bubble was a regal-looking palace that Ace assumed to be the Ryugu Palace. He relayed all of this information to his brothers. "Really, I wouldn't mind seeing the big guy again. Last time we went they made some pretty good food," Thatch said with a smile as he thought about the feast that had been prepared. "As long as you wouldn't mind the brothers coming along with us, yoi," Marco said, bringing everyone's attention back to the fact that the two commanders were accompanying the three. "I'm sure you wouldn't mind at all. Neptune's pretty understanding," Jinbei said coolly. "Ah, that's not necessary. We can go back to the Mobi if it'll be too much trouble," Sabou said with a smile, waving his hands. After all, the brothers didn't exactly have the best track record when it came to royalty and nobles. Jinbei raised a hand of his own. "Nonsense, the more the merrier. Come, I'm sure they've already started cooking the feast," Jinbei said as he turned, whistling for something. Out of nowhere, a giant fish came down, a bubble around its midsection as it lowered just enough for the group to board the seating on its back. The brothers were a bit wary, but Thatch and Marco seemed to trust this guy, and Luffy had said he was good colors. Not to mention, there was gonna be a feast and they would be able to ride on the back of this giant fish. "Let's be cautious," Ace tapped as he began to follow Marco and Thatch onto the back of the fish. Sabou and Luffy nodded minutely as they followed as well, all of them inwardly excited about what was to come, yet nervous for what could happen. After they were all on the fish they began ascending up to the entrance Ace had seen. On their way up, Marco and Thatch both got out their bubbly coral, explaining to the brothers that the palace was full of water. Hearing this, sabou took out their own bubbly coral, surrounding the three of them in their own bubble. When the fish reached the top of the bubble, Jinbei used a den to call the guards inside the palace, telling them that they were there. The entrance opened, a stream of water rushing down to the now open entrance, and the fish quickly swam in, taking them up to another bubble containing the Ryugu palace. "Wow, this is so cool," Luffy said in amazement as he peered around them. Once they were out of the stream and in front of the palace, Luffy lit up, eyes sparkling at the immaculately decorated building. "Sugoi," Luffy cried as he took it all in. Sabou sat in a similar state of awe while Ace tried his best to look unsurprised. After all, he had seen it from below. What's so special about seeing it up close? Despite this thought though, Ace's eyes couldn't help but roam over the detailed statues and structures. The doors to the palace opened and Jinbei got off the fish, the rest of them following him as he walked in. "What have I said about trying to do strenuous work? You have to be more responsible, you know it'll strain your back." "You're right, I'm sorry, and not to mention, you're always sneaking off alone, do you know how dangerous that is?" "I'm sorry, Jammin. And another thing, Minister of the Left, Minister of the Right, King Neptune, I've returned with the Whitebeard pirates and their guests," Jinbei said with a smile, interrupting the scolding coming from the group. The three turned to face them, a look of surprise on their faces. "Ah, Marco, Thatch, it's good to see you two again. How's Whitebeard, Jammin?" the giant merman asked as he swam forward to them. "He's well, Yoi. How about yourself?" Marco asked politely, the man smiling pleasantly. "Just fine." "Ah, who are your guests?" he asked as he looked over to the brothers who tensed up a bit. This was clearly the king, or at least some sort of royalty if the giant crown was anything to go on. "This is Ace, Sabou, and Luffy. They're brothers who were staying on the Moby for a while." "Well, indefinitely really," Thatch said with a grin. The giant raised an eyebrow but smiled regardless. "Oh, that's interesting. It's nice to meet you boys, Jammin. I'm Neptune, king of the Ryugu kingdom." Neptune greeted cheerfully. Sabou smiled and bowed, Luffy mimicking him and Ace begrudgingly doing so as well. "The pleasure is all ours, your majesty," Sabou said in as polite a tone he could manage, using his noble upbringing to his advantage, even if it did make his stomach churn in disgust at the thought of memories from so long ago. "Please, just Neptune is fine," Neptune said with a laugh as the three rose once more. Luffy did what he does best, scanning everyone as quick as he could as he rose, eyes jumping from one guard to the next until they finally landed on the blue aura of the king. "Good people," Luffy told his brothers. "Well, the feast should be ready soon, Jammin. In the meanwhile, why don't I catch you up on everything that's been happening here on the island since your last visit?" Neptune asked, the two commanders nodding in interest. Sabou began to pay close attention to Ting to know as much about the people on Fishman Island as possible in case there was anyone they should actively try to stay away from. Meanwhile, Luffy was beginning to get bored. Ace was paying close attention to the people around them in case anyone did anything to endanger them, but that left Luffy with nothing to do. He had already checked everyone's auras, and after checking the mass pool of feelings in the room he found none of them to be malicious. With nothing to do, Luffy began to get a bit antsy. He knew better than to do anything to attract unwanted attention, but when a suddenly delicious smell wafted to his enhanced senses his mouth began to water. The giant king guy had said that there was going to be a feast. Would he be mad if Luffy just so happened to show up to the feast a bit earlier than the others? Shifting his weight between either foot, Luffy began having a war in his head. On one hand, Luffy was starving, even if he had been snacking on delicious food in the town before this. On the other, he didn't want to get in trouble for doing something wrong. But the food smelled so good, it was practically calling to him. Luffy hadn't even come to a decision when his feet seemed to move on their own toward the smell of food that invaded his senses. Ace was quick to notice the moving boy and grabbed his hand, following after him as he used their silent language to get Sabou's attention. "Luffy, where are you going?" Sabou asked as he glanced from the conversation that the adults were having, and then to Luffy who was nearly out of the entrance hall entirely, Ace following close behind. "There's food this way," Luffy replied absent-mindedly, Sabou slinking off after his brother, being careful not to be spotted by anyone. "Luffy, we can't just wander off, someone's gonna notice," Ace said with a frown as he looked back to the room they had just left, seeing that, so far, no one had noticed their departure. "But it smells so good, they said there was gonna be a feast, right?" Luffy asked as they walked further down the unknown hallways. "Yeah, but that doesn't mean we can just go there, besides, it would be a little weird if they found us in the dining hall without knowing how to get there in the first place," Sabou replied with worry, wanting to get back to Thatch and Marco before they inevitably noticed the brothers' disappearance. "Come on now Luffy, let's go back," Ace said as he stopped walking, tugging on Luffy's hand to get the boy to go back with him. Despite his want for food, Luffy knew better than to argue with Ace, especially when it came to their safety. With a pout, Luffy nodded, turning to follow his older brothers back to the entrance, but they hadn't even made 2 steps in that direction when Sabou froze, turning to look back where they had been going. "Sabou, what's wrong?" Ace asked in a whisper as he looked back down the hall as well. A little further down the way, he could see a weird divide where it looked like the water ended and it was air instead, but it made it hard to see what was past the divide, the water distorting everything. He could see that there was someone down there, and he could see that they were pushing something, but he couldn't quite figure out what it was with all the blur. "I hear. It's a rolling cart, like back at the facility," Sabou said in a hushed, almost choked voice as flashbacks no doubt ran through his head at lightning speed because of the familiar sound. "But, they are making a feast, so maybe it's for moving food?" Ace asked, wondering why the sound would make Sabou so nervous all of a sudden. They'd heard a similar sounding cart on the Mobi before, and though Sabou had been a bit disoriented by it before, he had never looked this scared over it. "It's not just that, but I can hear crying coming from over there too," Sabou said, paler than he had been a moment ago. Ace frowned at this and Luffy began looking around nervously. "Should we check it out?" Ace asked a bit hesitantly, not knowing what to do with the information. "I don't know. What are the chances of a facility being in a place like this? Is there even more than one facility?" Sabou questioned nervously, not sure if he wanted to know the answer to either question. After all, the thought of more than one facility existing in the world was a terrifying thought. Their facility had been on an island where the villagers knew and allowed it, so it wouldn't be too far-fetched to think that a whole kingdom could know and hide a facility as well. But that would mean that the whitebeard pirates knew about this facility too. If that was the case then, that meant there was a possibility that they were here to take the brothers to another facility. "Sabou?" Luffy asked, a look of nervousness on his face, and Sabou had no doubt that his little brother had been picking up on his emotions, influencing his own as a result. "What's wrong, Sabou?" Ace asked, just as nervous, knowing that whatever Sabou thought up, it wasn't good. "Hopefully nothing. Maybe we should go check it out, after all, if it is a facility, that means we should leave. Now," Sabou said a bit quickly. None of them wanted to check it out, but all of them knew that Sabou was right. So, with a lot of reluctance, the three began heading back towards where Luffy had been smelling the food, more on guard than ever before. The walk felt like an eternity, but soon enough they were walking out of the water and into the air, their bubbles disappearing as they did. Up ahead, Ace could see a giant rolling cart, whatever having been on it gone now as a giant fish man pushed it towards them. The brothers managed to walk around the cart at just the right angle, the guard not noticing their presence in the slightest as they did. Continuing on down the hall they saw a giant pair of doors, shut and locked with dent marks on it. "The crying's coming from in there," Sabou said hesitantly as they looked up at the massive entrance. "The food smelled too," Luffy whispered, tilting his head as he wondered how they would get in. Looking around quickly Sabou turned to Ace. "Is anyone around? Any surveillance snails?" Sabou asked. Ace raised an eyebrow at the question but looked around regardless. Not seeing anything he turned back to Sabou, shaking his head. "No, nothing, why?" Ace asked. Sabou turned to look back at the door, frowning. "Luffy, do you think you could stretch your arm up there and pull the door open?" Sabou asked, his brothers now understanding the need for caution. Luffy looked at how far away the handle was, calculating quickly in his head if he could reach it or not. "Yeah, I think so," Luffy said, stepping back a few steps and winding his arm up to stretch. He hadn't been able to stretch it too far lately, only a few inches when they were alone in their room, so it would be nice to finally use his powers like this. Ace was keeping a close eye for anything that might see them while Sabou listened for anyone who might be coming. Winding back Luffy swung his arm, extending it all the way to the handle and grabbing it successfully. The giant door was sturdy, and because of that, and its size, it was also heavy. It wasn't too much of a challenge, but it still took a bit of struggle for Luffy to pull open the door a few inches so that he and his brothers would be able to fit inside. "Good job, Lu," Sabou whispered as he and his brothers inched nervously to the crack in the door. The room inside was dark, but Ace was able to easily see that it looked nothing like how their facility had looked. It looked more like a bedroom. "What's inside, Ace?" Sabou asked as he and Luffy peered uselessly inside, unable to see anything. "I think it's a bedroom. There's a bed over there and a dresser and stuff. It's all pretty big though, like that King Neptune guy big," Ace said as he took a step into the room, his brothers following while holding onto his shirt for guidance. "Maybe it's a decoy, like how they pretended we were a part of a mental hospital," Sabou mused while Ace began looking for anything like a door that would lead to an actual facility. SHT all their attention as they spun to face the owner of the noise. "Is there a person in here?" Luffy asked quietly. "I don't know, I don't see anyone but I can't see on the bed, it's too high up," Ace whispered back, thinking that maybe they should start communicating silently to each other now that there was possibly a person in here with them. "I can feel a presence in front of us, and I think breathing too. Is that where the bed is?" Sabou asked as he used his haki and enhanced hearing, seeming to think the same thing as Ace as he switched to tapping rather than speaking. Ace reached out with his own haki, and even though he wasn't that good at observation haki he was still able to pick up the presence of someone in front of them like Sabou had. Yeah, maybe someone's on it. Should we climb up and check it out? Ace asked, wanting the confirmation before he led his brothers towards a potential danger that they couldn't even see. Sabou hesitated, still not sure how they should proceed, but knowing that they were already too far into this. Why don't you go check it out? Luffy and I can stay here seeing as we can't even see anything to begin with. Sabou said a bit reluctantly. Ace nodded, though no one saw it, and began moving away from his brothers, Sabou dropping his grip of his shirt, but Luffy didn't, instead tugging on it a bit, making Ace turn to him and question. Be careful, Ace. Luffy said, a frown present on his face and a look of worry to go with it. The eldest smiled, knocking Luffy's straw hat off and ruffling his hair. Always Lu. Ace replied. This got the youngest to release his grip as well, grabbing out for Sabou's hand, which he found, while Ace turned back to the bed, grabbing the blanket hanging off of it and tugging it to make sure it wouldn't fall with his weight. Finding that it was sturdy enough for him to climb on, he began ascending up the side of the bed. Quiet rustles being the only indicator for Sabou and Luffy that Ace was still moving. When it grew quiet, they assumed that Ace had reached the top and Sabou kept his ears trained for any noise he could pick up. He could still hear the faint sounds of what could be breathing, and now he swore that was a muffled step from Ace. I think someone's under the covers. They're huge too, just like the king. Ace confirmed, Sabou, picking up the tapping even from where he stood. He relayed the information to Luffy, the boy shifting his weight nervously. Let me get a bit closer. Yeah, it's a person. I think they're asleep. Maybe they weren't the ones crying earlier? Ace questioned. A sudden bang on the door made them all jump and spin to face it, but there was no one there. What was that? Luffy asked as he looked at the door with wide eyes, trying to calm down. Crap, I think they're waking up. I'm coming back down. Ace tapped a bit frantically, and Sabou could hear the frantic rustling as Ace quickly maneuvered his way down the blanket and back onto the solid ground. He had only just managed to touch the floor when a light suddenly flickered on. Hello? Is someone there? The high-pitched feminine voice sounded shaky and nervous, but loud all the same. Sabou tightened his hold on Luffy's hand and pulled him over to Ace, pushing them all under the bed out of sight. Megalo, do you see anyone? This confused the brothers because they hadn't seen anyone else in the room. Reaching out with their haki, they noticed another presence, but this one was a bit different from the person on the bed, more animal-like. There wasn't much time to linger on that thought because suddenly the edge of the blanket behind them began moving, and a snout poked its way under. They didn't have a chance to find another hiding spot before a shark's face was staring right at them. Immediately, the shark began growling at them, shimmying under the bed and forcing the brothers to leave the cover. What is it? Oh, who are you? The three turned to look at the fearful mermaid sitting on the bed. She had her hands to her mouth and her eyes were wide, already beginning to water with unshed tears. Why, you're here to kill me, aren't you? OPWonders let you? I'm not scared, the giant mermaid said, voice timid compared to her words. The shark was still growling at them, even snapping a few times in warning. The brothers were at a loss in terms of what they should do. They didn't want to draw any attention to themselves, but they were in a bit of a pickle now seeing as they'd been caught. They still had no idea what was happening and were even more confused by why this girl thought they were going to kill them, but now wasn't the time to worry about that. Ah, no, that's not why we're here, Sabou said, raising his hands in a peaceful manner. I won't be fooled. I'm Neptune's daughter, so I am not scared, the mermaid cried, and now the brothers knew that this was a princess they were dealing with, not a kid locked in another facility. I'm not scared, I am not. Tears started falling, making loud splashing noises as they did, and the brothers winced as she began wailing loudly. Father Sama, brother Sama, she cried, bringing her hands to her eyes as tears fell faster. Oh great, that's not good. Ace muttered with a frown, anxiety beginning to take form as he realized that somebody would surely come now that the princess was sobbing. Really, we're not here to hurt you, promise, Sabou said, ignoring Ace as he tried to calm the situation down. The shark was still growling, in between the brothers and the princess protectively as he did. Why's she saying she's not scared? She's really scared, and sad, Luffy said, confused as he stared at the wailing princess. Shush, calm down. Sabou was cut off as he heard a whistling in the air behind them, as if something was heading their way, fast. Something's coming, he hissed to his brothers, all three of them spinning to face whatever it was. Ace could clearly see something heading their way and he was pretty sure it was a sword. He couldn't even tell his brothers about it because it was suddenly right in front of them all, and it took everything the brothers had to block the sword from coming any closer. The three used as much haki as they could muster to block the sword from moving anymore, the force of it pushing them back a bit, until they were able to push it away, allowing it to fly harmlessly into the wall. What was that about? Ace asked as he looked at the weapon now lying uselessly on the ground. Again, there was no time for anyone to answer because Sabou could hear the sounds of footsteps heading their way. Shirahoshi, who had stopped crying in the midst of everything happening, was staring silently between the brothers, the sword, and the door. Crap, I think guards are coming, Sabou muttered as he frowned. The brothers were definitely done for now. Well, that's just great. What else could go hey? Ace couldn't even finish complaining as the princess scooped the brothers up in her hands, muttering a quick sorry before hiding them behind her back. What's the big idea? Shush, she's hiding us Ace, calm down, Sabou whispered to Ace, he and Luffy sitting in the princess's hands. Ace stopped talking as the guards rushed in, asking what was wrong. Oh, I think I had a bad dream, the mermaid princess said in an apologetic voice. Was that all? Why is the door open? Did someone come in? One of the guards asked, making the princess shift nervously. It must have been the one who brought my food, she asked a bit hesitantly. She didn't want to get anyone in trouble, but the three humans had just saved her life, so it was the least she could do, right? I'll have to speak to him about proper safety techniques. Oh, that reminds me, the whitebeard pirates are here again, a guard said, and the mermaid lit up. Really? She asked happily. That's right. They brought some guests with them too. Apparently they're honorary members, but they seem to have gotten lost in the castle somewhere. If you see them, don't hesitate to call us. The pirates are worried about them. It was a strange me one was worried about the brothers, especially seeing as they hadn't even been with the pirates a month yet, but it was also nice to hear. To be honest, it made them feel a bit bad that they had worried them. I will, the princess said, bringing the three out of their musings. There was the sound of the door closing as the guards left and the princess sighed, moving her hands back in front of her as she looked at the brothers, a look of worry on her face. Thank you three very much. I was being very rude before, please forgive me, I didn't know you were with the Whitebeards. What are your names? She asked. Ah, well, I'm Sabou and these are my brothers Ace and Luffy. What's your name? Sabou asked politely. The princess smiled. I'm Shirahoshi, King Neptune's daughter. You're with the Whitebeards, so you're good people, right? Shirahoshi asked. Yeah, you're a good person too, Luffy said matter-of-factly, taking in the bright blue aura around the princess, almost just as, if not more, bright than Ace and Sabou's. Anyways, what was with that sword? Ace asked, looking back over to the weapon that the guards had failed to notice earlier. That's a good question. Who threw it? And from where? Sabou asked as he also examined the weapon closer, taking in the rose pattern on its hilt. I know who threw it, Shirahoshi said somberly, a frown on her face as she turned to look at the sword. Was it a bad person? Luffy asked with a frown as well. I guess you could call him that. His name is Vanderdecken. He holds a grudge against me for refusing to marry him. That gentleman has a devil's power called Mato Mato. Shirahoshi explained. The three frowned as they listened. Mato Mato? What's it do? Ace asked. It allows him to strike me anywhere anytime with a thrown weapon since he designated me as his mark. That's why it's too dangerous for me to leave this hard-shelled tower. Shirahoshi finished. As she did, Luffy's stomach rumbled and she looked down in shock. Sorry, I'm still hungry, Luffy laughed, rubbing the back of his head as his brothers rolled their eyes. Oh, well you can have my food if you want, Shirahoshi said with a smile as she gestured to the giant plates of food beside her. Wah, really? Luffy asked, eyes sparkling in delight and mouth watering in anticipation as he stared at the feast in front of them. You did save me after all, and you're with the Whitebeards. It's the least I can do, Shirahoshi said happily as she lowered her hand over to the food. Luffy cheered and jumped over to the food. Ace closed behind while Sabou followed at a much slower pace, shaking his head at his brother's antics. Ace and Luffy began chowing down, Sabou opting to take a much smaller portion, while Shirahoshi watched in amazement. So, this Vanderdecken guy wants to marry you, but he's trying to kill you? That doesn't make much sense, Ace said, mouth full as he spoke. Luffy nodded his agreement beside his brother as he took a bite out of the bread. It's been 5 years already, Shirahoshi said as if it wasn't all that big a deal. 5 years? You must be bored, Luffy said as he swallowed. This time Ace nodded in agreement as he took a sip of the water. On top of that, my father made a rule that the guards can't stay here for more than 5 minutes. Megalo here is the only one I can talk to. He's my dear friend. The mermaid princess said a bit somberly now as she looked over to the shark who was close by. That sounds like no fun at all, Luffy said with a frown as he began slurping up a piece of seaweed. Not really. Anyway, you humans sure eat a lot even though you're small, she said, observing the mass amounts of food Ace and Luffy were scarfing down in record time. Ah, don't use those two as reference. Regular humans eat much smaller portions. I, for example, am quite content with just this much, Sabou said as he showed his much smaller portion of food, more comparable to how much normal humans ate. Shirahoshi giggled at that, resting her head in her hand. So you three are with the Whitebeards, right? Do you guys go on a lot of adventures? She asked wistfully, looking off somewhere. Well, we haven't been with them long, but they have gone on quite a few if Whitebeard's stories are anything to go on, Sabou said with a smile as he thought back to the stories the old man would tell them. Oh yeah? Have you ever seen the sun? There are stars in the night sky, aren't there? And there are different kinds of flowers and hairy animals. Have you ever been to a green place called a forest? Shirahoshi asked with a dreamy look in her eye. Sabo laughed a bit nervously at all the questions while Ace and Luffy eyed her weirdly as they continued eating. That's a lot of questions, but yes, basically, yes to all of them, Sabo said, ticking off fingers as he tried remembering all the questions. Really, I've always wanted to see those places, but it would be selfish for me to leave my room. The princess said, looking over to the giant doors sadly, sighing a bit as tears began welling up again. Sabo didn't know what to say to that, especially seeing as the mermaid looked to be on the verge of crying again. You can't leave because of that Vader deck guy, right? Luffy asked as he and Ace finished up the last of the food. Sabo mindlessly corrected Luffy's mispronunciation of Vanderdecken's name while Shirahoshi nodded, turning back to look at the brothers. So we just gotta stop him, right? And then you can leave, Ace said, crossing his arms and frowning. Why yes, but no one's been able to find him, Shirahoshi said, eyebrows slanting in worry. Don't worry about that, princess. Anyways, I think we should be leaving now. If what the guards said is true, the commanders are worried about us, Sabo said, standing and smoothing his down. Ace and Luffy nodded in agreement, both getting ready to leave as well. Before they were able to say goodbye though, the princess began sobbing again. You three are really nice. Thank you for wanting to help me, I'm sorry I kept you here so long. She sobbed, Ace TS king at the tears. And I thought Luffy was a crybaby, he muttered though Shirahoshi didn't hear over her crying. Regardless, Sabo elbowed his brother while Luffy laughed. It's no worry princess, anyways, I guess this is goodbye for now, Sabo said as he and his brothers jumped onto the bed, narrowly avoiding a falling teardrop, and making their way down the blanket. Goodbye Sabo-sama. Luffy-sama. Ace-sama, Shirahoshi said, tears still falling as she waved goodbye to them. Megalo waving as well. The three went to the doors, Sabo listening to make sure no one was near, and then pushed them open with his brothers, enough for them to slip out. Once out they shut the doors again, looking around once they were out. Now, let's hope they're not mad about our little disappearing act, Sabo said with a sigh. Ace and Luffy nodded and the three began heading off in random directions, waiting to randomly come across someone. It would be better if they were actually lost in the depths of the castle so that it would look more believable to whoever found them. It didn't take long for Sabo to hear Thatch and Marco talking and to lead his brothers in their direction. Maybe Marines got here without us noticing and took them. Marco, what if they were caught again, and we didn't even realize? Thatch said with a worried voice, making Sabo wince a bit in guilt that they had worried the chef so much. I'm sure they're fine, Yoi, and if they were taken Oyaji would go after them. Marco replied with his normally stoic tone, but Sabo was sure he heard a bit of worry in it as well. Well, yeah, but there you three are, we were so worried. Thatch said, tears of joy springing to his eyes as he ran over to them, looking as if he was going to hug them. They tensed a bit, not exactly ready for the physical touch, but allowed it regardless, trying their best not to squirm or push him away. After all, they had been trying to get more comfortable around the pirates, and that meant being able to physically interact with them without fear that they would stab them in the back while they did. Sorry, Sabo stuttered out, entirely focused on not pushing the commander away and not paying attention to how articulate he was. Thatch pulled away, a relieved smile on his face while Marco watched with his arms crossed, shaking his head at the chef's antics. Luffy gets bored easily and wandered off in the middle of your talk so Ace and I went after him, but we got a bit lost, Sabo explained after regaining his composure. We're sorry to have worried you, Sabo apologized, bowing slightly. Oh, don't worry about that, I'm just glad you three are safe. Right, Marco? Thatch asked, grinning to the commander who nodded. Let's get back to Neptune, Yoi. I think the banquet is ready, Marco said, and Luffy could feel the previous worry that had come from the commander dispel into calmness. Luffy smiled happily and nodded, grabbing his brother's hands and following behind the commanders. Even though they had just eaten, Ace and Luffy would happily eat more. So, did you guys see anything cool in the palace? Thatch asked as they walked. Sabo refrained from mentioning the fact that they had met the mermaid princess and instead opted for shaking his head. No, we didn't look in any rooms, just wandered through the halls. Sabo lied easily because there was no way he was telling him the truth. Well, I guess that's for the best, this is a palace after all. It wouldn't do us any good to get caught snooping into things we didn't mean to find. Thatch said with a shrug, but there was a mischievous feel about him that said he wouldn't mind doing exactly that. Sabo smiled at that and nodded, agreeing with the chef's words. It didn't take much longer for the group to wander back into the entrance hall where Neptune was talking to some guards, the two ministers by his side. Neptune, we found them, Thatch said cheerfully as they walked up to the king. Neptune but smiled happily. Fantastic, Jammin. Then let's go to the banquet hall and celebrate. Neptune announced, and the brothers couldn't help but smile at the enthusiasm. It was strange to them that, even though this was a palace with, no doubt, high security, no one questioned the brothers' disappearance. Surely they might be bothered over the fact that they had potentially been able to witness something they didn't want others to know. However, that didn't seem to be the case as they walked into the banquet hall and the brothers' little excursion hadn't been brought up once. Food came out in waves and as the group was seated plates were filled. Sabou gave a quick reminder to his brothers to attempt to use the manners they had learned seeing as they were in a palace and they were, in their minds at least, on thin ice with everything that had happened. Conversation was made as food was eaten. Topics such as updates about the island, where they could resupply, where they were heading next, etc. were mentioned while the brothers ate their food silently. This was probably the first time since Shanks' party that the brothers had a chance to fill up as much as they wanted. Sure, they had been eating more on the Mobi now, but it was more of the necessary amount rather than the amount that they would like to eat. Now, however, they were able to have 2 meals without anyone being the wiser. As the food diminished and the banquet ended, they all said their goodbyes to the king and the ministers, as well as Jinbei. Marco and Thatch began heading out, the brothers closed behind when Sabou picked up on a conversation between 2 guards. "I swear I locked that door, who would be crazy enough not to?" "I don't know man, maybe you thought you closed it and it didn't latch correctly?" "No, I'm telling you, I did the usual protocol, even waited a minute to make sure it wasn't going to slip open." "Ah well, as long as Princess Shirahoshi was fine. We'll just have to be extra careful next time. Maybe all those weapons are taking a toll on the door." "Maybe." The mutter from the guard didn't sound all that convinced, making Sabou wince. "Yeah, they would have to be extra careful from now on." "Welcome back my sons, how is it?" Whitebeard asked from where he sat in his chair as they arrived back on the Mobi. "It was good Oyaji," Marco said, walking up to the giant. "Yeah, we had another banquet. Those royals sure know how to throw a good feast," Thatch said dreamily as he thought up the many different things he could cook with the inspiration he got from their meal. "Gararara, I don't doubt it," Whitebeard laughed. The brothers watched as the 2 commanders began chatting with the captain and decided they would head off to their room. It was getting late now, the group having spent the entire rest of the day on the island and having dinner at the palace. They slipped off silently into the catacombs of the Mobi and headed to their room, Ace yawning and stretching as they did. "I wish we could have more feasts like that, it was delicious, and we got to eat much, right Ace?" Luffy asked happily as he thought back to their day. "Sure did, Lou. Maybe we can do something like that again one day," Ace mused, a small smile on his face. The food was pretty good, not to mention plentiful. Sabou agreed, thinking back to the giant-sized portions that had been served. They reached their room after that, the 3 filing in quickly and shutting the door behind them. Ace and Luffy immediately went straight to the beds, pulling off their wristbands and flinging them over to their desk without even looking. Sabou rolled his eyes, taking off his own wristband and walking over to the desk, placing his with his brothers. "If you lose those then you can't go on islands you know," Sabou said with a hint of a smile as he did. "What, Ace, you almost made me lose mine," Luffy cried as he looked over to their wristbands with wide eyes. "What do you mean I made you? You threw it, not me," Ace retorted angrily, but Luffy wasn't hearing it, instead pouting and crossing his arms, looking away from the eldest. "Meanie, you don't want me going on islands," he muttered, only riling Ace up more. Sabou laughed, getting into bed and deciding to defuse the situation he had kind of sort of started. Now, calm down, they're still safe, you've just got to be more careful with them next time," Sabou said, ruffling Luffy's hair, his straw hat sitting on his lap. The youngest beamed at him and nodded, promising he would be more careful with it. "Whatever. Anyways, what are we gonna do about that Vanderdecken guy?" Ace asked as he crossed his arms behind his head, laying down and staring at the ceiling. Sabou frowned and laid down as well. "We're gonna beat him up," Luffy said as if it were obvious. "We could, but the pirates don't know we can fight, remember? If we just show up to the palace and say we've defeated him there's going to be a lot of questions," Sabou said softly, paranoid that someone would hear their conversation. "Oh," Luffy mumbled as he lay down as well, frowning a little. "But, we are going to help Shibasoshi, right?" Luffy asked, completely butchering the poor princess's name. Sabou smiled gently at that. "It's Shirahoshi, Luffy, not Shibasoshi," he corrected, the youngest's face scrunching in confusion. "But that's hard to pronounce. Shibasoshi's easier," he said as if it made everything okay. "Remember the conversation we had before? Sometimes your nicknames can hurt people, even if you don't mean it." Sabou chastised gently, knowing that, sometimes, Luffy just couldn't be bothered to do something without good reason. "Oh yeah," he mumbled quietly, frowning a bit at that. He didn't want to hurt good people, and Shibasoshi was a good person. Even if she did cry a lot, which he knew made Ace mad. "Regardless, we are going to help her, so don't worry about that," Sabou reassured. The princess's situation reminded them all too much about their own experience at the facility, being locked up without any freedom. Of course, while they were in a dark cold cell and barely fed anything, Shirahoshi was in a warm, comfortable room and fed extravagant meals. Even so, a cage is still a cage, no matter how nice it is. "But we don't know how," Ace stated with a hint of annoyance in his tone, showing that he very much just wanted to go beat the man up and get this over with. Sabou sighed, already knowing this was going to be a tricky plan to pull off, and they didn't even really have a plan. Right now, no, we don't. I guess we're just going to have to see what happens tomorrow. Odds are though that we're going to have to fight him. I don't see a guy who chased after the princess for 5 years stopping now just because we asked politely. Sabou said as he thought about how they could pull this off. You're right about that. Ace muttered as he got comfy on the bed, closing his eyes, but still listening. Maybe Ace can use his haki, Luffy suggested happily, and his brothers looked over to him with wide eyes. Did you just suggest something smart? Ace asked in disbelief, mouth gaping at the idea. Meanie, Luffy said, knowing the words were an insult. He could be smart, just not as smart as Sabou. Speaking of, the blonde tried, but failed, to remove the shock from his face and address the suggestion. Well, that could work, but it's not a guarantee, it doesn't work on everyone, remember? Sabou asked. They didn't know a lot about the rare third haki, but they had found out through trial and error that the mysterious power didn't always work the same on everyone. For one, it didn't affect the brothers, whether it was because Ace wasn't directing it to them, or because they were immune like some others, they didn't know. Not only that, but when Ace had tried using it on some of the doctors, namely Haru, it had only made him stumble a bit, not knock him out like it had on other kids they used it on. That being said, the power, while helpful in some cases, was a hit or miss with their experience. Oh, right, Luffy muttered though, we'll definitely try it tomorrow and see if it works, Sabou said encouragingly, ruffling Luffy's hair and smiling to the youngest. Luffy looked over to the blonde and smiled widely, nodding happily at the fact that he had helped, even if only a little. We should go to sleep then. The faster we can beat this guy up, the faster that crybaby princess can leave her room. Ace said, rolling onto his side, facing away from his brothers in an attempt to fall asleep. Don't call her that when we're around people, please. Sabou groaned, knowing that there would most definitely be a reaction to the words depending on who heard them. He thought Luffy was bad, but now he had to worry about Ace's nicknames. Yeah, whatever.